Welcome back, everyone, to Lesser Known Operators. Episode 124 does not disappoint. Possibly my favorite episode to date. Long time in the works. Rolf Jensen and Nathan Dial, two of the original Special Operations Preparation Course Cadre from back in the day, X-ray program, plank holders of converting it over from a National Guard program to an active duty program. Let's see, we've got 2nd Ranger Battalion, 3rd Ranger Battalion. Rolf was the USASOC NCO of the year at one point. Lifelong friends. They met in the Bravo course, went through the course together, even best man at one of their weddings. Love it. I really enjoyed this story. At quite a few points, I lost the plot and found myself just listening to the stories that they had to tell. I loved this episode. I hope you guys love it too. A little bit long today, but who cares? It's my show. We can do whatever we want. What do we got? The hat today, Failed State Research. The shirt, runliftperform.com. As always, brought to you by Precision Wellness Group and Dr. Taylor Bosley. Precision Wellness Group helps you restore balance, unlock vitality, and fuel your momentum through bioidentical hormone therapy and evidence-based personalized telemedicine. Dr. Taylor Bosley is a board-certified physician, a U.S. Army veteran, and former Green Beret. He knows where you've been, where you want to go, and how to get you there. And he's an actual doctor and went to actual medical school. It's a bonus. So if TRT, HRT, hormones, testosterone, peptides, GLP-1s, or aesthetics, maybe something else, or something you've been looking into or just starting to, look no further than Precision Wellness Group and Dr. Taylor Bosley in Southern Pines, North Carolina. Walk in person, and a growing list of telemedicine states that he's licensed in. I think that's correct. Use code LKO20 on your consultation paperwork to save 20% on said consultation. I'll have links to Jensen Tactical, and I think that's it, in the show description. I do appreciate you guys. Please remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, pass these episodes along. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the show. Rolf Jensen and Nathan Dial. Welcome to Lesser Known Operators, gentlemen. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely. I'm glad to have you guys. I mean, obviously, I'm the only one who has been a witness to every moment on my show, and the 18 X-ray program and the beginnings of it have been something that's come up constantly, probably because the age I am and the rise of technology, and then now the amount of 18 X-rays that are in the regiment. And now we're now at 51% of the graduating class is 18 X-rays now in 2026. So it's obviously a program that hasn't gone away, but it hasn't been the program always. Everybody thinks it's a new thing. It just changed names when you guys came and started making an official active duty program, but I'm excited to talk more about it. I'm excited to have you guys on and to meet you guys. So Nathan, you're coming out from, you just recently retired as the mayor down in New Mexico, right?
I'm about
Stanton,
60
New
miles
Mexico.
from Albuquerque. Yeah.
Okay, so I assume just like out here in Chicago, there's a circle around Albuquerque where if you're within that circle, you're from Albuquerque, so you're close to there then.
Well, yes, but there's 45 miles of nothing between here and Albuquerque. So
Same thing here. There's Chicago, and then if you're from anywhere, it's 45 miles of nothing until you get to about my house too. And then Rolf, you're out in the Springs, right? Out by 10th.
Yeah, Colorado Springs. I stayed here after retirement.
Okay, cool. Well, fuck yeah. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on.
I don't know how you want to start. I can give you a quick brief of my career and a synopsis and the Rolf, and then I can tell you my history there as I know it of SOPC back to the 80s. If that works.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely fine. I mean, because if guys have come on and they'll say SF baby, there's Rep 63, there's the 18 X-ray program. You brought up one that's always been very curious to me that I had only heard of. That was a rumor. That's not was a paper tabs, but I've heard that and I don't know any more about it. So we'll get into some other things, but no, you guys are both from Ranger Battalion, 2nd and 3rd, which are not the same if you're from Ranger Battalion. Those are quite different. I imagine they were quite different when you guys were there as well.
Yes. My claim to glory is I was on leave for the invasion for Panama.
Okay. Does that still, I mean, if that's the first thing you're going to bring up about Ranger Battalion, it probably still bothers you then.
Yeah, it bothers me, but I wouldn't be where I'm at if I had made that jump. So I'm getting over it.
Do you know Randy Searles?
Who?
Randy Searles?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, he was on the trip to Panama. So he's another Green Beret that was on the trip there. He's been on the show. He was on like episode, I want to say in the 70s or something like that. Now he's living out in Europe and he's a ghostwriter editor for books and fantasy novels and things. But he's talking about how he shattered his tibia fibia on the jump and he just had to crawl to the Kazavakis collection point by himself.
Yes, there's a lot of great stories, and a real cool one. A guy broke his back, and then I have two quick stories. This guy broke his back, and it haunted him that he never made to the objective. So I think at the 30th anniversary, they actually wheelchaired to him where he landed, and he pushed himself to the objective. So he finally made the objective 30 years later.
Better late than never.
And
That's pretty cool.
now here's a sad story. Oliveira was shot in the head, and it went in his Kevlar. Rickers did a scar over his head and stuck in the back of his helmet. And he became the spokesperson for Kevlar. And his mission in life is he created a memorial bell that was actually commissioned by Congress so he could go do ceremonies for soldiers that were being buried without not acknowledged, so on and so forth. Well, the sad part is about 6 years ago, after he finally got the bell commission and everything was going, he offed himself. And in his letter, he said that my wounds from Panama have finally gotten to me. So it was one of them. Once he no longer had something to focus on after 35 years, it still messed him up. And yeah, that's the kind of stuff that people don't want to talk about, but it's fact.
No, I don't want to talk about it, but I do. I mean, the posts I was working on before I came on with you guys is another suicide post. We lost 2 instructors at the schoolhouse in the past 8 days. One was 36, and the other one I think is my age, so late 30s. And this will come out later, so it'll all be public knowledge about the second guy, but it hasn't been announced yet. One was a SOPC instructor, I think. He's definitely working with the X-rays, and I've got 100 messages from students telling me how great of a cadre he was and how well respected he was. And I'm just like, fuck, did he know this? Obviously, there's not a great student cadre relationship, but to be well respected. And then his peers are messaging me like, what the fuck? And now we lost a SIF instructor from range 37 and he's a 5th group guy. And it's just awful sad all around. And it's a real fucking problem. And my buddy asked me last night, he goes, what do we do? And I was like, fuck, I don't know, man. Like, it just seems like guys are tired. And when you're tired, you just want to go to sleep. And it seems like going to sleep is the attractive option right now instead of pushing through and figuring out what you're going to do with the rest of things. So I get it. It's something we don't want to talk about, but it's not going away, is it? And seems to be at every level of life.
Since we haven't even actually started and we're already down a rabbit hole, which Rolf can contest, I will run down. What I found out quick, or not quick, and I try to emphasize to people after me that are retirement, because you go to jump master school, you go to talk to the guy that just went and you get your updates. When you retire, you can't go to the last guy that retired and get your updates. You just got to muddy your way through it. And what I found out is one day I realized, like, why is everybody around me crazy? Well, I realized I'm no longer in the team room drinking with all the people that are crazy like me. So then I realized, no, I'm the one crazy. They're just stupid normal. And that's when you got to realize, okay, it's not them, it's me, because I'm no longer in that alpha male, kill, fuck, drink, and repeat environment. So
it's yeah, it sucks. It's hard to describe to the guys how you feel once you leave the team room. There's words, definitely a lack of words to correctly convey what happens to you when you get out. But these are active duty guys. It's very sad. And, but they're going to schoolhouse. They might not be in the same environment. And when people ask me, they're like, what do we do? What do we do about this and that? And I go, Jesus, man, I saw one dude, his life go all the way out to suicide over one pull-up from the Q course. That's the chain of event that led to him. He got kicked out of the course. He went to the 82nd. He was having a bad time in the 82nd, and after a month of him being out of the course, he was gone. So one pull up ended this dude's life. That was just the catalyst from him losing his chance of being a Green Beret to being out. People have, you fuck with somebody's pay, that could push them over the edge. It's just there's all kinds of this shit. So it's like, what caused this? Anything, literally anything could cause it, because we don't know what we're putting away. I don't know what you think, Rolf, but it seems like a problem that is up to us to solve, because the government has never been able to help us effectively with managing our mental health. But it's also something very difficult to solve, because we're no longer obligated to hang out together.
Plus, on active duty, you don't want to tell the truth because then you lose your clearance and or ability to jump and your career and your family, and so you just lie to yourself all day long.
Well, we're good at that, aren't we?
Yeah. Anyway, off that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Nathan Dial. I joined the military in '86, Second Ranger Battalion. Got out in '90. Joined 12th Group. Went through selection through 12th Group. Got injured. I was on med hold while I was injured. 12th Group was dissolving. They sent me home. Transferred to 19th Group, and at that point, 19th Group sent me back. I went through their version of SOPC at that point. Went to 10th Group, got out of 10th Group. 6 hours after I got out of 10th Group in like March of '01, and 6 hours after the towers were hit, I got a call, "You're being recalled." A guy named Dan Romero was already at Bragg. He was an 18 Echo. I was 18 Bravo. I already had a packet to go to Bragg prior to that. The command asked me, "We need Echoes, not Bravos. Would you mind swapping?" I'm like, "Sir, you tell me what to do. I don't tell you what my..." So I went to Bragg instead of Afghanistan, stood up SOPC. From there, did an Afghan tour, came back, stood up Camp Bullis for Texas SF, and then retired.
Just a trivial, quick wave of the hand career, but so
I
was it
did a
RIP?
stint
You
in
went through,
in
you went through
Panama,
RIP.
all that shit, Bosnia, blah blah. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Is is it called Rep 63? What you went through in the reserve, scarred?
It was a pre-selection. They called it pre. It wasn't it wasn't a formal program, and it was run by. And we can get in. We'll get into this. There was full-time guard and reserve guys at Fort Bragg with regular Bragg jobs, and their additional duty was once a quarter or whatever. They would gather up all the Rep 63 guard reps or National Guard guys and run a pre-selection. So that was basically the because the well, let's go back. Well, Rolf, you want to do your introduction?
Yeah, so Rolf Jensen, I originally joined the Army in 1985, went to basic training in '86. So yes, I went to airborne school in '87 with a steel helmet and jungle fatigues and green jungle boots. So yes, I'm a dinosaur. I was in the reserves initially. There was a infantry reserve unit. There was a drill sergeant unit, and then I switched over to the National Guard while I was going to college at the University of Washington, Seattle, and I was going through ROTC. But I just didn't feel like a career as an officer was for me, mainly because I saw it like as an officer, you had 18 months as a platoon leader, 2 years as a company commander, and 2 years as a battalion commander. And I'm like, not that I necessarily thought I'd have a career, but I'm like 5.5 years of quote unquote green tab leadership in a 20-year career just didn't seem right. Whereas I had this awesome NCO who had been in Second Ranger Battalion and had jumped into Panama, and he was talking about how awesome it is to be an NCO. So basically, he like mind melded me into wanting to be an NCO because I could be a team leader, I could be a squad leader, I could be a platoon sergeant. And that stuff was never on the docket at this time. But he's like, you can go up through being a first sergeant, sergeant major, all that stuff. And I was like, I don't know, that sounds a lot more fun to be with the guys rather than being on staff. So I basically exited ROTC even after going through advanced camp, enlisted in 1990, went through RIP, went to Third Ranger Battalion, went to Ranger School, had a sergeant major come down one day when I was smoking some kids who didn't know the Ranger Creed, and he told them to get lost, and he brought me in his office. So I'm standing on the carpet, and he introduced me to what's an old FM called FM 22-102, Soldier Team Development, and he's like, "That's not the way to do it. That's old school stuff." But the problem was he knew my name, and his issue was he had a whole bunch of NCOs floating around Ranger Battalion who'd been there for like 8 years and gone from private to staff sergeant in the same platoon. And he's like, "I got to get people out of here." So he's like, "If you've been here 2 years, better think about a new job." If you've been here 3 years, I'm going to find you a new job. And this is, so I was like, ooh. So I went over to RTB and spoke with, I got it somehow, I don't even remember how. I got an interview with the CSM over at the 4th Ranger Training Battalion, which runs part of the Darby phase of Ranger School. And I said, can I come over here? Because the problem with Ranger Battalion was you had a whole bunch of guys that made it to Sergeant E5 very quickly because you had exception of policy, but then you had a whole bunch of E5s floating around that couldn't make staff sergeant because of time and grade, time and service type rules. So yeah, you had saw gunners that were sergeants, so it's like you just had all these sergeants running around. So he's like, I got to clear all these guys out. So Ranger School has what they call a Mike platoon or Mike force, which is basically the Op 4 and Darby phase. And so guys who either got in trouble bad or needed whatever break, they could go over there, kind of have like an easier time playing Op 4, do infantry stuff for 2 years, and you're still at Benning, so you go back to Ranger time. The other thing that mattered in this was that at that time there was an 11 Mike MOS, which is basically a Bradley fighting vehicle crew run. And that was, if you went to the brigade from the 3rd Infantry Division was on Kelly Hill, if you went over there, they made you an 11 Mike, and you were never going to go back to 11 Bravo from there. Now, at this time, everybody's in 11 Bravo, but you could never go back to being 11 Bravo if you went 11 Mike. So I was like doing everything I could not to go to Kelly Hill in any way, shape, or form. So long story short is that I went to see the CSM, and he's like, I'll bring you over here, but you're not going to go back to regiment when you're done. You're going to go to the 82nd or the 101st. I was like, I left his office, drove straight over to the SF recruiter's office, never having intended to join SF. I mean, I thought about it, and I'd been around SF guys, but went over, signed up, and I walked in, the guy's like, I'm so glad you're here. I just had some thing got changed, and a bunch of guys can't go. Can you go in 2 weeks? I'm like, roger that. So I go to selection, pass it first time, get through it, had to wait a couple months, almost like 7 months before I go to the Q course, and then go to the Q course in 1993 and or 94, whatever it was, and me and Nate link up in the first 5 minutes of being in there, and we've been friends ever since. And then I went from 3rd Ranger time to after that to 3rd group. I was in 3rd group for a couple of years. I was the USOC NCO of the year, so they gave me unit of assignment. At this time, 3rd group had just been formed and was going to Africa, and I had gone to Africa and was like, get me the fuck out of Africa. And so I said, give me a 10th group, which was in Bosnia at the time, and that was like the only real action going on. So I got the 10th group, got here in 97, and basically never looked back. So spent 24 years in 10th group and 34 years serving total.
Jesus, I always feel like such a loser when everybody goes through there. Like, oh, I did 8 years and I spent the entire time trying to be or trying to remain a Green Beret, and then I failed at it. And they're like, "What happened?" "Oh, I just kept hitting my head over and over again, and nobody would let me do anything, so I had to get out." But so you said, Rolf, you said the NCO that talked you into being an NCO had jumped into Panama, so that was somebody
Yeah.
that Nathan knew.
Or no,
So that
I'm
was your
sorry.
first.
My mistake, not Panama, Grenada.
Grenada.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, I was like, that's pretty
Yeah.
close in the timeline to make it over there as an
I was
ROTC
in
instructor.
I was in Ranger time right after Panama. It's my mistake. Grenada. He jumped
No.
in Grenada, and after he went from 2nd Ranger Battalion to ROTC instructor up at University of Washington, and that's why I met him in the 80s.
Okay,
Something
so
he's leaving out, to go to selection in 2 weeks just without notice. What did you place in the Best Ranger competition?
Oh yeah, so I did Best Ranger competition a couple times. So I was 6th. I was 6th, and then I had a DNF because my partner tapped out during the road march, and then my Best Ranger competition is a whole nother episode because of the craziness that went on with partners. And I mean, one partner got DUI while we were training up for it, like 3 days before it started, he gets a DUI. I'm like, are you kidding me? So I basically had a substitute partner who tapped out on the road march, and then the other time I did it, I had a guy who found out that he had lied about getting through dive school, but he was a master sergeant, had already gotten through, had already been a team sergeant of a dive team. They found out that he went to dive school, but did not graduate dive school, though he wore a bubble. So they ripped his tab and kicked him to the regular Army. He retired as a CSM. He's been a Fox News contributor. So, but he was my Best Ranger partner and ended that episode pretty quickly.
So you've actually finished Best Ranger competition
Yeah, I
though.
did 6th in 1992. They didn't have one in 91 because of Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
Desert Shield, yeah. I mean, just finishing is that puts you in the top. What is it? That puts you in the top 25% of everybody. That's just by itself because only 10 or 12 teams finish every cycle. So, um, I don't. I mean, people are like, "How hard is it?" I was like, "I don't think I could fucking finish." Like we SF, we never fit. Like our teams almost never finish now because there's just no time to prepare for this for the lead up to it, and it's so rigorous. There's no breaks for 3 or 4 days. So, okay, yeah. I mean, but we should. If you're gonna graduate, you should be able to go to selection on 2 weeks notice, right? I tell guys they're I keep my fitness now, but it's easy for me to say now. If Sergeant Major gives me a call this week and he's like, "Nick, I can get you back in the Army, but you gotta go to dive school on Monday." I'm gonna be able to go to dive school on Monday. I don't think I'm gonna pass, but I'm gonna pass the events. I'm not gonna pass one man, but I'm gonna pass the events. And so that's you gotta keep that in your mind, otherwise, I think we start dying. That's what I think as well, though, so I try and keep that with my fitness.
That
Okay,
seemed to
but
kind of happen more than once because I was in third group and I basically been bitching to different people about not getting to go to scuba school because I wanted that opportunity. The group command sergeant major knew me because I'd won the USOC NCO award, and so I came back from Africa and I forget how it happened, but anyway, he brought me in his office and he's like, "Hey, I heard he's a seventh group guy." He's a big guy too. He had been a boxer and all that stuff. Anyway, he's like, "Hey, I heard you want to go to dive school." I go, "Yeah, Roger that." He's like, this is when I was frustrated. This is when I was kind of like contemplating, like, am I going to stay in the army, third group, Africa, blah, 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 all this other stuff. And he's like, okay. He literally picks up his phone, calls over to seventh group, has a conversation. He's like, "Hey, pre-scuba Monday. You're going to pre-scuba." I had no pre-training, no water training. I mean, I knew how to swim, but there was no like dive team to give me like instruction on like weight belt swim or anything. And seventh group started off. They thought you should have training beforehand. So first things first, they start you right off with 16-pound weight belt swim. And the only reason I got through that course is probably 12 or 15 guys that started and when we started, I basically could swim like across the pool and I grab onto the side, the gunnel, and somehow I separated myself from the rest of the class. So we're all, and the way seventh group ran their preschool was like they would, if somebody's on the gunnel, they'd be like, "Release the gunnel, release the gunnel, release the gunnel. You're failing train, get out of the pool. Done. No more, no training, no like, hey, try harder or let's remove some weight or anything like that." So I just happened to be separated from the group. So when I was on one side of the pool, the entire class was on the other side of the pool, getting yelled at by instructors and getting pulled out. And when they'd see me sitting on the side and they start running over to me, I would swim across the other side of the pool, just the opposite of where the rest of the class was. So I basically survived that 7 minutes by, miracle or, grace of God kind of thing that got me through that. And then from there, they actually did some training, but they were never, but I took all that experience. I'm like, this is not the way to train people in pre-scuba. And so I revamped 10th group pre-scuba when I later on and ran a whole bunch of pre-scubas for a while and based it all on the fact of like, we are going to train you how to do these tasks. You are going to learn how to do this here. This is a learning school, not a crush you school. And so um, yeah, but the fact is like, hey, it's Wednesday at 10 in the morning. You're going to pre-scuba Monday. Suck it up, Buttercup.
it's how times have changed though, because this kid, he's getting ready for selection and he messaged me and he's like, I want to go to dive school when I get to the teams. Do you think that's going to be okay? I said, bro, if you get your beret and you even think the words dive school, Sergeant Major will somehow cue in on that and you will have a slot. If you even let anyone know that you want to go to dive school, you will go to MAC immediately. It's not they can't get people to go to dive school because it fucking blows. Like,
Well, I hate swimming. That's just me and water don't get along. But and I actually taught boat ops down in Panama, jungle operation. But Sears, same way. In Ranger Battalion, they're like, you can't go to Sears school. You're not high enough on the Order of Merit list. 10th group, like, you're an E6. You don't need that shit. You're not going to go. Well, I was an E8 and fighting with soldiers. Like, you're going to Ranger school. You ain't been to Sears. Well, watch it. And plus, I needed to get a divorce, and she was at Bragg, so I needed a free trip at Bragg. So I went to Sears school as an 8, which don't do that. That's a bad idea. And when I got liberated, they pulled me aside and say, "Here, here's you're liberated twice." I said, "What?" And they handed me my divorce paper. And I was like, but yeah, same thing as you're saying. You want to go, but nowadays it's like from what I hear, like you said, yeah, people getting into anything like that.
Yeah. If the wrong person hears I want to go to dive school as a retired, non-reenlistable civilian, they'll probably figure out a way to get me to go to it. But we'll see. We'll see about that. If they ever call me on that, I'm gonna be a little bitch. I'll be there, but I'm gonna drown. That's for fucking sure. So, but I've talked to a couple other guys, and you brought that up. You know, they've said that the original kind of framework that you guys set up for SOPC was based on kind of the dive training that so you observed the wrong way to do things, and then you modified it into the correct way, and then how to train civilians to go be successful at selection. Because somebody mentioned that you guys had like a 95 or 97% pass rate for those that graduated SOPC that got selected.
Yeah, let me start real quick. So the cadre at the time, and Nate's going to take up on this because he was there before me, and it was actually Nate that got me there because I got my orders to SWIC as it's like, hey, we're all going. 9/11 happened. It's obviously 2001. Like, we're all going to combat except for you, Jensen. You're going to SWIC. I'm like, God damn. So anyway, and at the time, I'm not sure if you can still do this, but I kind of started calling around to see who was out there and like, hey, maybe I can go to dive school, be an instructor. Maybe I can go wherever and be an instructor, right? Anyway, Nate was, and I thought, well, I'll go to the Bravo committee. But at the time, I talked to a guy, and he's like, "Oh, this E8 over here is a total asshole. Don't come here." I'm like, "Oh, all right. Well, I won't go there." So I called Nate, and he's like, "Come on over, man. It's great. This is fun. We're teaching SUT and got these young guys." I'm like, "All right, sign me up." So Nate gets me over there, and there's essentially what became a cadre of mostly guys who'd been in Ranger Battalion, which had gone through RIP, and then augmented by guys who were divers. So it's basically like a combination of the old school RIP and pre-scuba. And everybody kind of had that philosophy or vision in their mind. And that was kind of the mind meld that happened for that. And it wasn't that way when I first started out because, whenever you start something new and they're like, hey, SUT, give me 2 instructors, or Robin Sage, give me 2 instructors. They aren't sending you their best instructors. They're sending you their ash
No,
and
really?
trash.
No,
Initially.
that's not. No
Initially.
way. The Army would never
So
do that. The Army would never do that.
yeah, and so it's not like the guys were necessarily bad because we did, come together and all this stuff. But the first couple cadre were a little on the I'm not going to say sketchy, but just, they were underperformers to some degree. And so, but they were good guys. And so, but as more guys came into it, as this thing grew up and got bigger, most of the guys came in with that Ranger Battalion background or a dive background. And Nate was there before me,
Well,
so he can
speaking of
talk
that,
to the inception.
well, when Rolf called me, I'm like, yeah, dude, you got to come over here. Well, I went to the NCO-led at the time, who was a Grenadier Raider, Dan Hesseltine. And I said, hey, I got a buddy of mine. Do you know Rolf Jensen? He'd like to come on. And I didn't realize that Dan had been Rolf's team sergeant in 3rd group. Just one of them small world things.
Well, group was at that time much, much smaller because it's 2001 or 2002. It's 2002 now, right?
Well, late 1, early 2.
Okay. So, I mean, group was at an all-time low for Manning because the 90s were not kind to group, like a drawdown, no money, sadness, just max level sadness as far as it went. If you weren't going to, what was it, Bosnia, or you weren't going to South America, you weren't doing a whole lot of anything.
Yeah, first group had gone
I
down
got
to
a
4
good
teams per
story.
company. And yeah, first group had gone down to 4 teams per company because I saw a buddy at Enoch that told me about that. And then 10th group had gone down to 5 teams per company. And that was pretty standard across the entire regiment.
Okay. So it's a lot more likely that you would know each other coming across, especially from at Bragg. So,
And
okay.
when we actually start, I'll tie in the drawdown to basically the pre-selection. So, SOPC, as I understand it, back to the mid 80s. There's always been Rep 63s. Correction. Yeah. Yeah, there have always been Rep 63s. Rep 63s are the National Guard and Reserve version of an 18, or actually an 18 X-ray is an active duty version of a Rep 63. People don't know, in the 80s, I don't know if it was early or mid 80s, they actually tried the SF Baby program. And so a guy from active duty or from off the street could go straight to SF, but they had no train up. They were literally just thrown into the meat grinder. So it was a huge failure. I'm not saying, in fact, one of my team sergeants was one of them SF babies that happened to make it through, because the track was basic AIT Airborne School, old phase 1 with zero
Right
training.
into SUT. Right into SUT then.
So, well, no, old phase 1 was before selection. Selection's only been around since 85,
7?
86. Before that, they
Yeah.
had the old phase 1, which was where they weeded you out. You were actually in the Q course. There was no pre-select. They would weed you out in phase 1. So, and then funny story, some of the people that went to the first, they had went through the first SF selection, but they were still running the old phase 1. So they actually basically did selection twice. So anyway, so that SF Baby program just was a disaster. And at the same time, and this goes back to the 70s, believe it or not, you could actually become a Green Beret through correspondence. That's called a paper tabber. And that was for the Guard and Reserves, and you did most of the Q course by correspondence. And then it took like 3 years. You had to do 2 weeks, and your 2-week drill was like 2 weeks at MOS. And the next year was 2 weeks of whatever, and then the last 2 weeks was at Robin Sage. And what's crazy about paper tabbers is they could be active. There are a lot of the Guard units that were activated after 9/11. The senior leadership NCOs, more than not more than not, but more than you think, were paper tabbers. So they were active duty sergeant majors that went through the Q course through the correspondence.
What do you mean by like, because
Literally
we,
an
in
Army
the modern,
correspondence course. Do you remember? You
like,
remember the old books?
well,
They
we
used
had
to,
them, it was digital. You would just do
they
correspondence
used to have a hard
online.
copy book, and you would just go to drill, fill out the book, mail it in, and you did that for 3 years, and you got a Green Beret. You got SF tab.
Is that when, because I've heard guys say on-job training, is that lumped in there as well? OJT?
No, the OJT, that goes back to Vietnam. In Vietnam, if you did OJT, you could be awarded SF tab because you actually did missions in country. Believe it or not, in the beginning of the war, there were some support guys that actually tried to reactivate that program to get their SF tab because they deployed with SF teams, and active duty said, no, that shit ain't gonna, you didn't do what the Vietnam guys did. So, but no, this was strictly correspondence, old school Army book that they sent you. In the back page is a test. You fill out the test, you mail it in, they grade it, and then you do that for 3 years, other than going to drill in 2 weeks summer, going to Fort Bragg, and you got your SF tab. You know, it was funny. So
US
these guys
Postal
are on
Service.
active duty. Yeah. So they're on active duty running SF companies, SF battalions. But if they wanted to go active duty from the Guard, the active duty said, nope, you have to go to the Q course where we don't recognize the paper tabs. It's a crazy mess. So
Did
anyway,
anybody do that?
no, the active duty went, no. And nobody was like, I'm not going through the Q course as an E9. So, and that kind of relates back to when they said SEER school is mandatory for SF. Well, they had battalion sergeant majors that hadn't been SEER to school. They weren't going to make them go to SEER school. They let them go to combat, and they slowly have let them guys retire out. So nowadays, everybody's been to SEER. But before 9/11, I'd say less than 30% of the group had been to SEER. So anyway,
Right, yeah.
so now we're to the mid 80s. SF Baby program at the time fell apart, and the Guard and Reserve, they did have a pre-selection program at Bragg for 8 Rep 63s to go through, and it was strictly pre-selection. There was no SUT part. It was just land nav and smoke the guys. So when 9/11 hit and active duty said, okay, hey, we're going to recreate the SF Baby program, but we're going to learn from our mistakes and create a train up, they absorbed the Guard program and called it a new active duty program. So the initial cadre at Fort Bragg were, well, I'll say Adrian Levitt, Dewey Carter, I don't remember all their names, but they were National Guard guys that were on active duty orders at Bragg with an additional duty to run a pre-selection. And then when I got on the ground, they're like, nope, this is now a new Army program. Here's your checkbook. Go create this program to include small unit tactics. And it became SOPC, which a lot of people don't realize it changed to SFPC because we, as Special Operations Preparation Course, we actually started getting other branches that were sending soldiers to us like a pre-ranger. And I'm like, why do I got a Navy guy here? Why do I got an Air Force major here? So then they changed it to SF, so Special Forces Preparation Condition instead of Special Operations Preparation Condition. And to revert back, so when I got to Bragg in the 92, I literally got to Bragg and I had no uniform, no physical, no clearance, nothing, just orders. They just like, here's your orders, report to Bragg. In my mind, I'm going to get there and they're going to just throw me out of the course because I'm not, I don't even meet the minimum requirements. I got to Bragg and they said, oh, you fall in that category. And I looked over and there's like 30 people. I'm like, there's a category for people like me? What is so fucked up? Well, what I come to find out is this was Clinton put the carbage and the reduction, and the only way for a prior service individual to get back on active duty was to go Special Forces. Well, what the recruiters did, if they found a great candidate that was a cook or whatever MOS, they're like, if you want back on active duty, you need to go Special Forces. He's like, I don't want to go Special Forces. I didn't say you're going to go Special Forces. I said, you need to sign a Special Forces contract. So they would sign a Special Forces contract, report to Fort Bragg, go down the road to the agent, get a paragraph and line number for their MOS, come back and quit. And now they're back in the Army. But SWCC didn't realize they got inundated. So instead of, at the time, you had a captain, a first sergeant, and a supply sergeant that was handling all the guys that were coming in to go through selection. And so they went from dealing with like 150 guys every quarter to dealing with the 600-800 guys a month. And it was just a nightmare. There's a guy named Bill Howell. He was on one of the first teams that went into Afghanistan. I think he was on the team that rescued Karzai. He was in that category. So because I was an E5 Ranger qualified prior service, there was other 2 Spec 4s that were Ranger qualified prior service. They put us in charge of this group because they literally asked, who is here just to get back in the Army? And more than 2/3 of the formation raised their hand. They're like, okay, you guys go over there. You guys, you go over here. Now, the problem was somehow in their contract, they weren't considered back on active duty until they'd been through selection. Well, there was such a backlog, so it took 6-8 months to get to selection. They couldn't PCS their families. They weren't on Medicare or military. They were running on partial pay. It was just, I literally took the formation and marched them over to the IG's office to make a complaint. And they actually brought finance to the barracks that night because they're like, what's going on here? So that's when I first learned about Rep 63s, SF babies, paper tabbers, and the whole, because I was thrown right in the middle of it going, what the hell is this? And Sergeant Major Beerhouse, who was a Reserve Sergeant Major SF Vietnam guy, he's the guy that took care of me. He's like, look, I'm going to put you in pre-selection. You're going to go over to Delta Company and you're just going to get lost in the squash. And no, that will give you time to get your physical and your uniforms and so on and so forth. So I spent like 90 days on the ground at Bragg just trying to herd these cats of guys that were trying to go back active duty, but they couldn't until they got through selection.
If there's a program the Army puts out, the recruiters will find a way to manipulate it, and, it doesn't seem like things were any different back then. So that was in '92, you
Well,
said,
yeah,
when
that
you
was in,
came
yeah, 92. And I went through selection. I made it through
and then
selection, got hurt in the Bravo course, came back a year later, met Rolf. Literally, we were upstairs in the barracks. Like he was on that side because we're both trying to get NCO rooms because, them old barracks used to have little private rooms on the end. And other than that, it was an open bay. And I
yeah.
saw he was a third bat guy, and I introduced myself. And I didn't even think we unloaded our baggage before, like, well, let's go to the bar. And we've been buddies ever since.
So you guys met in '93 when you went through the Bravo course. Set the scene. What does Bragg look like at that point in '93? Because now it's all big, beautiful. Have you guys been recently? Or at least
I
seen some
went,
pictures?
when was the last time on Bragg? I know there's a guy named Tony Yost. Um, he got killed. I did a presentation to his son of a rifle about 5 years ago. I think that
Okay,
was the
so
last time I was on Bragg.
it's pretty much there's only 2 or 3 buildings left of the original buildings, probably from when you guys were there. The sign, they just moved the sign. It's the Quiet Professional sign. That building's, I think, now condemned and being torn down. But you guys, what did it look like when you guys were there in the '90s? The footprint for the schoolhouse.
When you first started the Q course, so the Q course had 3 phases at that time. Later on, as a SWIC instructor, they had 6 phases, but nonetheless, they had 3 phases. First phase was SUT, second phase was your MOS, third phase was Robin Sage. You had language school, but that wasn't considered a phase. That was just like something else you did. And selection wasn't considered a phase. It was just selection. They always have tried to play with the Q course and manipulate it, change it, and make it so it's both uh, making the most out of the guys that are getting the information and graduating, prepping them as best they can to get on a team. Because, when you go out of the Q course, when you leave the Q course as a graduate and you go to a team, philosophically, you are ready to deploy to combat. Like you could go right away. Now, I know like most units are going to have a pre-mission training or PMT, maybe a cephalic that they're going to send you through, or maybe some sort of like welcome to this group. You're going to go through a couple training events or get you set up for success. But in general, you are deployable once you graduate the Q course. Like this is completely different from NSW, where you go through buds. And when you leave buds, it's a 2-year cycle that you get into a platoon, and the last 6 months of that 2 years, you deploy somewhere. So you have 18 months of train up before you ever deploy. So like a graduate out buds is not deployable until 18 months later. So different philosophy in what you are getting out of the Q course, and they've always played with the academia and the sequence of events. So when Nate and I got there, they had changed it to where you started in MOS. So the first thing you started with was classroom stuff, right? And you had PT in the morning, go to classroom, learn 18 Bravo stuff, light weapons, heavy weapons, disassembly, assembly, what they meant, all the little characteristics, a lot of rote memory stuff. And then you went to, when you graduated that phase, you went to what they called phase 13. Phase 13 was 1 and 3 combined, which is where the number comes from. And it was SUT. Then in our case, where we had it lined up with like 4th of July weekend, we had 4th of July weekend at the end of SUT. And then you come back on Tuesday and you go straight to Robin Sage. And then you went and did Robin Sage. So it was straight, basically like in the field or field environment or Camp McCall. Because you got to remember, we were living on main post. There was no like Camp McCall. Like what Camp McCall has evolved into was nothing like that. At the time, they still had tar paper shacks on Camp McCall, which were kind of like the original selection buildings that people would stay in. And then like when I went to selection in 90, whatever, 2, 3, whatever it was, then they had like these metal buildings, but they were open bay. But at the time, they always joked back then they had what they called the $1 million shitter, but because it was like one great big, place where the showers and the bathrooms, but that was like the only place you really had heat. So like I went through in February of I guess not 2 for selection, and it was pretty cold. And the only hot water we got was out of a spigot in the bathroom coming from like the heating unit. And so you didn't have any hot water for your MRE. So, and if you wanted to do laundry, you had to use a washboard. And they had tubs and washboards for laundry. There's no washing machines, there's no dryers or anything like that. So it's fairly primitive, which I kind of thought like that's fine, right? Like that's kind of prepping it for if you're going on some sort of expeditionary event into wherever country that, yeah, you might have to do laundry that way. There's not going to be all these services, and Kellogg Brown and Root's not going to be there to set up chow halls and stuff like that. So I didn't mind it in that sense, but it was what it was. That's what you got, right? And so there was also something about I remember that they didn't give us mattresses on the bunks because the mattresses had gotten like infected with whatever people
MRSA.
and people sleeping on them because they didn't give you sheets or anything. You basically just had poncho liners and stuff like that. So we had like wood on our bunks when we slept inside. And it was like, well, all right, it is what it is, suck it up, buttercup. So anyway, so we went to so you go to selection, you go back to your unit, you hang out for 6 months to a year, then you go back to the Q course. You started actually, if you didn't have BNOC, you had to go to BNOC, which was like 10.
Shut up.
And Nate's gonna love this one because you had 10 days of BNOC in a small group instruction environment, and you had the ANOC instructors were tagged to do the BNOC 10-day portion. So check the block. If you already had BNOC, you basically sat at the barracks and did like details. But if you didn't, then you sat in the formation. You had to show up at formation. And again, some other time or whatever, if we get into halftime, Nate showed up not ready for BNOC and got crushed day one just because he was like, I thought we were just going to show up and hang out. And the BNOC instructors were like, dress right dress, starch. This is when you wore BDUs and green jungle boots. And so everything, and this is back when you had, at least I know in Ranger Town, we had this idea of like spits and starch, which is if you were going outside the compound and you're going to go to the commissary or PX or go get food, you had to be in spits and starch, which means your spit shine boots and starch uniform. And if it was April 15th to October 15th, your sleeves had to be rolled up. The Army-wide, that was Army-wide kind of stuff, right? I mean, more extreme in Ranger time, but I'm saying Army-wide, your sleeves had to be rolled up if you're in garrison. And then if you go in the field, you had fluff and buff, which were just like black boots. You could pull your uniform might have holes in it that had been sewn up or something like that, but basically not starch, your field uniform. And so Nate showed up in his field uniform to a time when he should have been in a starch uniform. And that was that was the beginning of his BNOC experience. And anyway, good times,
Okay, in my defense, the first time we went to the Q course, before I got hurt, BNOC was ran by the MOS committees. So I made it through light weapons and I was in heavy when I got hurt. So the first part of the Q course was you literally sat in the Bravo committee for a week with open manuals, no instructors. They said, we don't give a shit about this, but we have to show that you sat here for a week. So when I got hurt and came back and they said, okay, you guys are going to BNOC, in my mind, it was the old, nobody gives a shit. No, I didn't realize they had turned it over to the ANOC committee and the ANOC committee took it serious. And yes, I was humbled that day.
Sucks to suck, right? That's just kind of how the course goes. Sometimes you're lucky and you don't have to do anything, and sometimes you're not. And as you said, they're always trying to optimize the course. They're doing it right now. People are showing up and they're like, what do you mean we're going, okay, now you're going to airborne. No, airborne's at the end of selection now. They're moving shit around. So there's always something sneaking up on you.
Like when we were instructors there in SWIC, they had played with the idea of like, because, you do all this training, you go to language school and you either forget your MOS or anyway, they were starting to insert like 2-week blocks of language school, I think in between different instruction portions of your MOS. And, and guys would start their MOS, but then go to language school, then they go back to their MOS, they'd forget whatever they learned in language school. And so people were like failing the DOPT and couldn't speak their language when they came out with any kind of capability. And, I guess my problem with that was like, I feel like there should have been like a baseline that, okay, we try this thing. If it's successful, we keep it. If it's not, or it's not getting the the graduates or the level of graduates we think we should. Let's revert back to the baseline and then kind of rework it from there. But it's like they just keep going around in different arenas and like changing the sequence of events. And I get it where you're trying to, you assess it and assess the processes and see what the graduates are coming out, and you hear from the groups of what they're getting from the guys that are showing up. But it just always felt like you're kind of twisting it too far from the foundation was, at least as I knew it, right? Because I'm sure if you talk to somebody from the 80s, their foundation is completely different than mine.
The things you guys describing or what you just described are the same thing the Cadre are going through right now. It's right. It's always, oh, we're there. Somebody's messing with the course. I think we're in the optimized phase right now. The course is optimized, but there's always a better way to do things, and whether that's good or bad. But no, I guess it keeps everybody guessing. Nobody knows what's going on or what will be going on in a year. So I don't think it's a good thing, but I'm sure some officer, it looks good on their OER. So
Yeah.
as long as it helps them, right?
Yeah.
Well, like I said, when me and Rolf were in the Bravo course, our whole room graduated. The next room, 2 doors down, that whole room failed. And a buddy of ours, they all moved into our room once we graduated. But anyway, through the whole Bravo course, we didn't have one barracks inspection, period. I mean, they didn't give a shit in the Bravo course. So, and when we went through, so language school was not part of getting your Green Beret. It was a secondary. So when we graduated, we're now Green Berets going to language school. And we do the duffel bag drag, 2 buildings over, find a room together, throw our shit on the floor and go out drinking again. And believe me, the drinking in the Bravo course was crazy. So like 2 hours of the first day of language school, they pull me and Rolf out of class and they're like, it looks like you guys just walked in your room and dumped your bags out. And I said, that's what we did. No, you're in a formal course. So now I'm a Green Beret that never had a barracks inspection room during the Q course in language school, having to do barracks inspections. And it was just, are you fucking kidding me? In fact, Rolf moved out shortly after that because I was like, wait, I'm a Green Beret now. I didn't worry about barracks inspection as a pogue or a non-tab, but now that I'm tabbed, I got to keep my room clean.
Damn right. Now you're held to a higher standard.
The other funny thing was that I hung up a Georgia state flag because I'd been in Georgia with, when I was in infantry. It's a state flag at that time, and it had the Confederate flag within its flag. But that was an official state flag. So I hung that up just because I liked Georgia and enjoyed it when I was there, that kind of stuff. So I hung it up. And they're like, you got to take that down. I'm like, that's a state flag. Like, what are you talking about? They're like, well, you can't have that thing up in the barracks. Like, nope, you can't have that. I'm like, that's a state flag. That is flying over their state capital right now. How are you making me take this down? They're like, take it down. And I'm like, roger that. But I just, it was just kind of like this weird. And what Nate said about rooms is that, okay, when we first started the Q course, just to finish this thought process, is that we started in the COSCOM area of Fort Bragg, World War II barracks, 2 stories, no air conditioning, really weak heat, but we weren't there for very long. We were only there for maybe 2 months. Open bay, by the way. So everything was open bay barracks on bunks.
Open bay bathrooms.
Then, yeah, community bathrooms, old school. And so then we did move over to brick buildings right off of where Zabatowski and our dens link up by where Burger King is. And they were kind of in that parking lot. And so we were not the ones closest to Zabatowski. We were down a little ways. And so we had that building. When Nate talks about duffel bag drag, we went to the next building over closest to Zabatowski for language school barracks. So different cadre and all that stuff. So we did have, and what we had was 4-man rooms in those brick buildings. These are like from Vietnam also, but they were like brick, like late 60s, early 70s. And so we had 4-man rooms. And I think only for a short time did we have actually 4 guys in there. So normally it's 3 guys. And we all graduated the Q course together. There's a room 2 doors down, and that had 3 guys in it, and they all failed the Q course one way or another. And so it was just kind of funny how you saw different combinations of dudes just not make it through or why they wouldn't make it through. And when we were going through the Q course, The Q course, you could still fail, and guys did, and, for academics, for whatever. When Nate and I were SWIC instructors, they were like, if you make it through selection, you should be making it through the Q course. Like, you made it through selection, it's almost like you're already a Green Beret. Now, granted, there's a part to that has to be understood. It's the world situation. We were just post 9/11. We're in 2002. The force had been decimated from the 90s, and I'll tell you why in a second. And so they needed Green Berets quickly. And so they were trying to get guys through the Q course to maximize dudes graduating to get them there. And they didn't want Cadre in the Q course, disqualifying or kicking people out when it's like, hey, you went through selection now, which clearly is not, in my opinion, the correct attitude, but you went through selection. To me, selection is like the chance to try out with the varsity. And then the Q course is trying out for the varsity. But you should still be able to fail there, not just because you get a DUI. The guys who went through, though, when we were SWIC instructors from 2002, 2005, and they're trying to fill up the groups, they were like, if you made it through selection, like, you're good. Like, if you passed, Bobby Seiko was the first sergeant out there, and he's kind of well known and pretty famous. He was a 7th group guy. And if they're like, if you made it through Bobby, then you should be making it through the Q course. And I was just like, wrong opinion, but hey, I'm not the one that's making that. So yeah, it was, so a lot of guys failed when we went through the Q course. I'm not saying guys didn't still fail going through when we were SWIC instructors. And just to cover down the history is that, so you had Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and in 1994-ish, they offered a 15-year retirement, and they're going to hold this open for 1 year. Well, so many guys took that, it decimated the SF ranks that they shut it off in like 8 months. They're like, oh, we got to stop because they lost so many people. So now SF was in a deficit starting like 1995, like not enough guys. And I remember seeing a brief on it. In like 1995, there's two things going on. You recruited in or got by numbers out of the Q course. Let's just use round terms. Let's say you got 2,000 graduates out of the Q course every year, but you had 2005 or 2010 guys getting out of the regiment by ATS or retirement. And they also faced a problem or a challenge that by 2000 and this is 1995, they said in 5 years, half of the entire SF regiment is eligible for retirement. So they were like facing this manning challenge of like, if everybody who could retire retires in 2000, we will have half the regiment left, period. So they were like, we need to figure out how to get people in. We need to do things. And then 9/11 happens. They're like, oh, now we really need to get people in. But that's why the groups had gotten decimated down to like 4 or 5 teams per company, is because we had this little bit of a deficit for year after year of people that we lost to ETS retirement, and they just couldn't replace them because you just didn't get enough guys in to replace them. And so, but that 15-year retirement was like the worst decision for SOF in general, because we lost guys out of, all portions of SOF, people got out. They're like, 15-year retirement? Hell yeah, deuces, I'm out.
I'm sure quite a few of them came back in when 2001 hit and went, wait, oh shit, it's time to party, guys. I want back. Let me back in. They're banging on the fence. Let me back in. I had one guy that came on here. He retired September 1st, 2001. And he was banging on the gate at 5th group to get back in September 12th. And he's like, oh, that's some bad timing there, man. But
yeah.
Okay. So drawdown 90s, not very, we didn't build anything up. After Vietnam, it was just kind of a slope downhill for Manning anyway. 7th group was the play to be. You brought up Bruce Parkman. He said 7th group was the place to be in the 80s and 90s. He never thought he could have so much fun in life. And then we draw down, and then we get to 2001. And I've said this before on the show. They say SOF can't be mass produced. That's the first one that goes out the window when we need to mass produce SOF, is we just do it, whether it's pushing more people through or changing the way we look at who graduates and things like that. Selection seems to have always stayed the same. Selection fucking sucks, and it's hard to get through. It's just whether what happens afterwards or what happens before is the changing. I don't know what you guys think.
SWIC actually came out with a policy that you could not quote the soft truth in a presentation.
What was that? One more time.
SWIC, as SOF cannot be mass produced, is one of the soft truths. They actually came out and said, "You, as policy, cannot quote the soft truths in a presentation." Because we're like, wait,
When
what
was
happened
that?
about not mass producing people? Get rid of all that. That mindset's gone.
When was that?
2004, I'm thinking. Right,
Okay, so
3, 4-ish. But anyway,
so they're like, okay, yeah. Well, then
yeah,
we'll put it on hold because it's back now. I mean, it's back now. It came back, you know, in the teens. They're like, no, those because when I went through, it's soft can't be mass produced. But our graduating classes were huge. There was selections were huge. We had 5 every month. I think there was like 500 people at selection or something like that in 2011, 12, 13, 14. So there was just plenty of people that wanted to go. Still, selection rates were very, very low, but with 500 person classes, it's okay if they're low. You're going to get a lot of people going to the course.
okay,
So, but
well,
that's funny. I've never heard that before.
yeah,
Hey,
yeah, because I actually one of my on the computer, my signature block was the soft truths, and I got pulled aside. According to the new policy, you got to change your signature block. I'm like, okay, whatever.
so I won't know. I know when I got there, which was March of 2000, already been running. It essentially had been like the design, if you want to think of like the line and block chart, was set up by the captain from 7th Group named Joe Martin, who later wrote a book called How to Get Selected, and then Danny Hasseltine, who was a master sergeant. That's a book that Nate has. And so Joe Martin wrote that with the proceeds going to benefit some organization. And in there, Nate and I and all the other cadre are listed. And that still stands as a book that people read or pull off the shelf in the closing of sales. So when we first got there is when I first got there in February or March of 2, it was just getting built up. Like you didn't have a lot of cadre, but the organization was, you had TAC NCOs. TAC stands for trainer, advisor, counselor. They ran the students kind of like drill sergeants, like getting them information, running PT, checking barracks, or making sure they had packing lists, that kind of stuff, right? All kind of like, I don't know if you want to call it Monday, but like the day-to-day operations. Then you had the Land Nav Committee, and the Land Nav Committee and the tax worked together. And so they were SOPC 1. Then you had, after the students went to selection and came back, they went to SOPC 2, which was SUT. And at this point, they're considered like, hey, you've gone through selection, so you're on your way to the regiment. You're kind of in the fraternity this time, so you're gonna be treated like an adult, and you're gonna be taught as a student, not as much of the aggression. But SOPC 1 was meant to be, like I mentioned earlier, a RIP slash pre-scuba. I always mention it as like basic training on steroids, because the key was, I didn't believe, and I think everybody in this talk and people watching will probably agree, that basic training, especially if you went there in shape, was not that challenging, right? It's a lowest common denominator type school. Like they're trying to get you through it. They're trying to give you basic military education and you get in the military. But I didn't obviously think that or airborne school was enough to put them in a position to be successful both mentally and basically. I felt like I needed to test their mettle. And the key to this story is that they had already been running at least one course before I got there. And actually, I think it was the first course. It was graduating selection. And so I got there literally by the second or third course. But what I realized is that there needed to be like more structure in how the students were handled. So I was put as attack. And basically, I just kind of started to a certain degree. A lot of the things that happened in SOPC came from me. So when people say like, we had all these gig pits, that was me. We had these barracks inspections, that was me. We had these PT sessions that would destroy us, that was me. And so it was truly meant to test their mettle physically, mentally, and to push them, because what I didn't want to have was anybody get through my training. And I knew that number one selection, like you mentioned, 500-man classes, easy to slip by and be the gray man. So somebody who is not a capable performer would get through selection, and then they could, at that time, like I mentioned, get through the Q course, because people were saying that leadership was saying like, once you got through selection, you get through the Q course, and then get to a team. And guys are like, what kind of guys are you sending us, right? And I wanted to have my name was stamped on those graduates. And so if they went through SOPC 1, they were going to get skull fucked. And that was purely and truly the way I saw it. So I started sort of imposing my will with the other instructors and saying like, I was just a TAC, but I started saying, this is the way we're going to do it. And they followed the lead. Like, for instance, we had open bay World War II barracks over in the area right across the street from the 82nd does their big command, changes of command, their pass and review, that big field, which I forget the name of that right off the top of my head. But it's over there in that corner on the road that goes out to McKellar's Lodge. I forget all these names, but anyway, so anyway, the story is it. So the organization was, TACs, and they, like I said, handle the students like drill sergeants. The the Land Nav Committee would give them land navigation classes. And then after selection, they would go to SUT, SOPC 2, which was SUT, and Nate had. Nate was the NCOIC of SOPC 2. I had a different individual in charge of SOPC 1 for land nav. And then we had a senior TAC, but he was an active guard E8 who spent most of the time behind the computer. So I kind of just grabbed the bull by the horns, and I had, again, a couple good dudes who'd been in Range Battalion or, like I said, combat divers. And so they kind of understood the mentality. And so we would crush them for PT at typical 6:30 in the morning. We used to run them up our dens and pick fights with the 82nd. We used to do all this stuff, right? It's like but we had this tank trail that went out. So one of the things we incorporated was a 0 day. So like Monday would be the first day of the training schedule, but we'd tell everybody when they're signed in, like, you had a 0 day on Sunday at, like, I don't know, 10 o'clock. And they would show up in formation, be in uniform, and we would double time them in uniform down that tank trail. If you got maybe a mile down that tank trail, there was a beaver dam. So there's a great big pond, which was perfect. And so it had a bridge across it, so you could run across it, but this pond was there. And so we would take them down to that pond and put them in chest deep or waist deep water and have them do some exercise. But basically, it was meant to get them tired, wet. And then we ran them a little further up the tank trail where it was like the softest sand in the world. And so we would spend about an hour to an hour and a half out there doing different types of calisthenics where they basically, in the end, turned out to be sugar cookies and were covered in sand in every piece or portion of their body. And so then we'd run them back and say, see you Monday morning for PT. And then when they would we told them, like, here's the standards for the barracks. This is the SOP. It's posted in there, like how their rucksack was supposed to be at the end of their bunk with their road guard vest over it and their LBE on there. This is when you had Alice packs and LBEs, like Vietnam era type stuff, or at least 80s type stuff. So rucksack down, LBE over it, VS-17 or your road guard vest over that, just like, in selection. And then you had a wall locker, but they weren't very big. So if you had excess stuff, it went in a duffel bag. The duffel had to be locked to your bed frame. So then when they would start the course, like Monday, after PT, we'd take them in for in-processing, and then we would go inspect the barracks. And that barracks inspection was always Tornado Alley. We typically, anything, if we found a duffel bag that was unlocked, for instance, all that clothes went out the window into the dirt outside. That bag would go outside. I mean, typically this happened several times, where they would be standing in formation outside, looking up at their barracks, and then they just, while they're in formation at ease, they're looking up and just seeing bags thrown out the windows, like breaking the screens kind of thing. Like, things were just getting tossed, mattresses tossed outside, sheets, blankets, whatever, tossed outside. It was like, not to standard, go fix it. And it was all there to give them. And to be honest, this is how I went through basic training in 1986. This is how my basic training was. So I was like, I know how this should go. So we're bringing it. We're bringing the Scunion.
Okay. And this is we're in late 2002, right?
Okay. Let me
early 2002.
Early 2002. And Rolf, you got to bring up Gunner in a little bit during the formations. All right. So I report to Fort Bragg. I'm a guardsman now on active duty. So I have to report to the guard liaison sergeant major for SWIC. In the elevator is me, Dave Corsino, and another 20th group guy. I forget his name. And a guy named Dewey Carter, who's one of the active duty guys on National Guard active duty on Title 10, sees us in the elevator and says, "Are you guys here to report?" Yeah, blah, 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 blah. he goes into the sergeant major's office and says, "Hey, sergeant major, you said the next guys that come through, I get to have to run pre-selection." He said, "Yeah, sure. All right, come on, guys." So he set us up. We walk in. I have no idea what SOPC is, or I knew what pre-selection was, but the command had already briefed the guard that the next active duty was going to take over the program. So it was a formality to report to the sergeant major. I report to sergeant major. They assigned me to this new program, and I forget what battalion commander, but we literally walked in, and there's like the Title 10 guardsmen that were already on brag, us two, and like one other guy that was in transit. And they said, "Here's a checkbook." And they looked at my background and they said, "Okay, you're going to be in charge of SOPC 2. And I'm like, "What's SOPC 2? "Oh, pre-ranger. You have 90 days to till you run your force course." So in December of 01, so October 9/11 hit, they went down to Fort Benning and literally said, "Anybody that wants to go special forces, raise your hand." Anybody raise their hand, they sent them to Fort Bragg. And by what I mean anybody, in our first couple of SOPC classes, we had DEA, ATF, FBI would come in and just snagging fuckers because they were wanted, or it was like there was zero quality control. There was no physicals involved. And that's another part of the story, because we actually got a doctor on the ground towards the end. But when you're teaching class and a 3-letter agency walks in and arrests one of your students, it's like, okay, this is interesting. But anyway, so that's December of 01 that I get this checkbook. And there was already students on the ground. And I believe of the first 90 or so students, and SOPC 1, the first class was in January 02. I think 13 or 15 of them guys went forward to selection in February of 02. And of them, 13 or 4, only one guy didn't get selected, and I think he got hurt. I picked him up as they're getting off the bus, or the 5 tons from McCall. I pick him up, and I'm like, "Oh, dump your shit, lay out. Okay, you're back to us. You've earned the right to stay a little bit longer." But at that point, it's like, okay, I'm here to teach them pre-ranger. I'm not here to really fuck with them. They got past the fuck with them course. And believe it or not, the students in SOPC 1, they looked at selection as a break. They wanted to go to selection because they got away from a Rolf Jensen. And then, we literally had to tell them, "You guys got to stop high-fiving in selection when you're the first two crossing the line. You got to be the quiet professional. We know that your physical conditioning is outstanding, but still, you got to be that quiet professional, the gray man." So students literally took selection as a break. And when I would pick them up, they're like, "Oh, fuck, we're back." But I didn't really fuck with them as bad as Rolf and them guys did, because I don't need to mess with you in SUT. I just hump you into the ground and keep you up all night. Just example, when we did the field phase for SOPC 2, it was a 14-day, Rolf, they said, "You have a 14-day training course. You have to run a 14-day course." Okay, so I come with a POI for 14 days. And I distinctly remember the last day of SOPC 2, the very first class, was St. Patrick's Day. And I'm in the field, and I can't get trucks to come get us out. And they're like, "Well, why are you in the field? You told me I have a 14-day training period that I have to." "Oh, no, you have to train them and up to 14 days. So immediately after that class, the first thing I did is I plugged in all the holidays and bike weeks and anything that we wanted to go party, and then I reorganized the training schedule around it. So it was a wide opening. So the field phase, around noon Sunday, we would give them a mission statement, and then they had to present an op order Monday morning. And then we would infield Monday night and hump them all night Monday night, point or area recon, and then we would collectively do a link up. We actually taught entry and entry of friendly forward units. I don't even know if that's part of the Army anymore. That's old Vietnam shit. So then we do a link up Monday night, Tuesday, Wednesday morning, and we would just do ambushes after ambushes after ambushes. So they would be up from whatever time they got up Sunday morning to the first time we would lay them down would be the earliest would be midnight Tuesday night. So yeah, and that's how I had to mess with them because I didn't need to smoke them. I just kept them up all night and just humped them and did missions after mission after mission. And I can tell you, them guys, they may not have been able to fill out a leave form, but if you gave them a mission statement, they could execute an op order and conduct an ambush.
Was anybody telling you what you had to come up with as far as curriculum, or was it all on you guys?
This is the best part about the whole thing. This is the purest example of NCO-led, NCO-run. The officer was kind of up and out, trying to brief because the colonel, the group commander, at that time there was only one group for one training group. The colonel was invested in this because he wanted to see what the results would be, right? And once we started producing the results, like Nate said, 14 or 15 graduate, right? We're 95 to 98%, depending on class. Either, a couple guys were like 21-day non-selects for one thing or another. But in general, 95 to 98% of a class would graduate, and they were like, "Oh, this is awesome! This is the best thing ever!" Right? And so they kind of left us alone, and that's where it came down to. You want to talk about like mission command or powering down to the lowest level is like, oh no, and like if you also provide the confidence in your leadership that you're going to handle the situation, well, then you go handle your business, right? And then they don't need to get into your business, right? So it was truly NCO-led, NCO-run from bottom to top all the way through. And the officer was basically there. I mean, we did have some good officers, and I've been trying to remember their names. I remember all their faces, but I can't remember all their names. But the key being, they were good guys and had gone on. I know a couple of them went on to have successful careers, retiring later on. But the key being is that good guys who were focused on up and out. So the NCOs were down and in, and that just made it wonderful. And that was the thing. It's like we were autonomous. We were able to just do our own thing. We were over there away from group, and so we just had our own little island of crushing spirits. And so the thing about it was, but there's a purpose for that though also, is that I felt like if you just ran the pre-selection the way selection was, like right time, like when I went selection, I'm not sure how it is now, but we had chalkboard, right time, right place, right uniform, no yelling, no nothing, just like have the right stuff and don't be screwed up, right? Which I assume is still the same way. The key being is like, if you don't have the mental capacity or the mental strength or maybe the guidance for like anything from cleanliness to like being responsible, having a good character, being able to work with other guys, if you didn't have that before you went to that, it wasn't going to find out that you were a bad team player until you got to a team. So it was basically training on steroids for a purpose to weed out those who joined the military because they saw a video of guys haloing out the tailgate of a C-130 and thinking that they could just jump right into it. It's like, nope, there's going to be a process. That process starts with me, and I'm going to destroy you until we figure out what you're made of. And it was not just like, but it was not like abuse meant. I'm sure some of the graduates would not agree with this so much, but it was not meant to be an abusive thing. It was very coordinated. It was very organized. And going back to that pre-scuba story, it was based on like a pre-scuba thing. Like we had a class on how to climb ropes. So you would know, we didn't just like make you climb ropes, because obviously you have the nasty Nick out there. You have to climb a whole bunch of ropes. It's like we gave them a class on how to climb ropes. So we would climb ropes, but we taught them how to do it correctly. We taught them knots. We taught them all kinds of stuff, right? So that they would be capable when they went there. Because you got to understand, like people join off the street, they go to the basic AIT airborne. They've never been anything but, and it doesn't matter what rank, but essentially like a private told what to do. But when they go to the Q course, they're expected to be equivalent of at least an E4, if not an E5, that's been in the regular Army for a couple of years. And especially if you're regular Army infantry and you've been private to E4, you've been on patrols, you've seen op orders, maybe you helped put together the op order, you've been exposed to this stuff. So we are trying to take essentially privates, regardless of what their rank is, privates, no experience and never in a leadership position, to possible team leaders in a rifle fire team for SUT. And then they go on from there, right? So it was quite a leap to get them there. So the instruction was very purposeful. The barracks inspections, were meant to be extremely hard at the beginning, drill into them discipline, drill in them dress right dress and what that looks like, and then back off of it, right? Just like a lot of things. The PT was meant to build them up so that by the time they graduated, the SOPC one, that they were peaking for their physical fitness, so that when they entered selection, they were not beat down and destroyed. They had been built up to a point where they were able to do, all of the events without question within their own mind. But that was the thing. They had to have it in their mind that there'd be no question that they'd be able to achieve success in whatever was placed in front of them. And that was the whole reason for the development process. And it was organized. It was like we had cadre meetings about like, this is how we're going to orient these guys to be successful. By the time they're graduating SOPC 1, they will be successful in selection.
Okay. And how many people were you starting out a SOPC with to get down to 15?
I believe the first class was like 90-ish. And that was just the very first class. And then it just grew from there.
Yeah. So the first class was I basically got there for the second class, and we had essentially like a platoon's worth, like 35 to maybe 45 guys. In general, the first year we had 2,000 guys come through. The second year we had 3,000 guys come through. The third year we had 4,000 guys come through. So every year it ramped up by another 1,000. So what we started with was, and this goes back to what Nate said, the first class, they went down to RIP, and I think by then it had been renamed RAS, but 75th Ranger Regiment, 9/11 happened. All these guys joined the Army like, I want to be a Ranger. RAS did not have the capability to have the throughput for large classes. So guys were waiting 6 weeks just to take the PT test to get into RAS down at 75th Ranger at Benning. And they're like, oh, you failed the PT test, because they weren't really like PTing them or whatever. I don't know. They failed because they failed. And so they're like, okay, you got 6 more weeks to wait for another class, for another chance. So guys were waiting down there for like months just to try to get to RAS. And they're all like getting, and they're getting put on details and farmed out as, free labor across the entire post. So they're like, so when Rep 63 was set, Rep 63 was a 2-week course, and it didn't have any field time. And when they did their ambushes, they kind of would like move Army men around like a train model. And then the regular Army took it over. Like, it's a 4-week course for SOPC 1. So it's 4 weeks. And that's nothing more than PT and land nav, prepping them for selection, and then the selection, and then the SOPC 2 with the SUT portion, right? Prepping them for the Q course. So 1 month, 4 weeks for SOPC 1. And then so the first soldiers that came from the 75th Ranger Regiment for the most part. And then I'm not sure if they got some from somewhere else, but that's where the first couple classes came up. Because imagine they slapped the table like, hey, we have this 18 extra program, go. Well, it takes, if a guy signed up the day they made the program, it's 4 months or 4.5 months before he shows up as a student, because he's got to get basic, AT, airborne, and then he shows up to Fort Bragg. So it's like, well, we got a program and we don't have any students. So where are we getting students? Like, hey, who wants to go SF? And a bunch of guys signed, raise their hands. So like that first class was whatever, 30-ish or so. The second class I was at was like, let's say 45 plus or minus. But it was basically one platoon. And the way we ran the cadre initially was you had one primary TAC and one assistant TAC. And then that primary TAC, when those guys went to selection, he had a chance to take 2 weeks of leave. And remember, you talk about selection being selection. Selection wasn't always selection the way it's been like for forever. For a time, they went down to a 14-day selection. And so they called it a 14-day selection. Because I know we had a captain go through, and his name was Pete. He came to the 10th group, and he was on a Discovery Channel thing that featured selection, and they used to call him 2-week Pete. So
2 weeks in hell,
but normally it was 21 days. And so it was 21-day selection. And then that was pretty standard, except for that small portion was 14 days. So, but anyway, so Nate, go ahead.
Yeah. Me and Rolf were our own adult supervision. And I cannot emphasize, they literally, nobody seemed to care. Because you got to remember, at the highest level, when they looked at regular Army and they said, how long is it going to take you to take out Afghanistan? This is the president talking to his staff. And they're like, it's going to take us 18 months. They look over to the CIA, and the CIA says, well, with an SF team and air assets, we can have flies buzzing their eyes in 6 weeks. All right, it's an SF mission. And active duty look at SF like, okay, they're going to be the speed bump that's going to hold them on the down till we can get the tanks there. They never thought that 90 SF guys is going to take the country in 90 days. And the same with SOPC, that, okay, this is a program. We're throwing whatever at the wall, see what sticks. Nobody cares. Just do what you think you have to do to run this program. And we essentially were our own worst enemy, because somewhere at the Pentagon 2-3-star level, they were doing a slideshow, and it was a one slideshow, and somebody clicked on there and it showed the numbers for SOPC. And then they went on, and whoever was getting briefed said, no, go back to that other side. What is that? Oh, that's that new SF baby program. Don't worry about it, sir. He says, look, are these numbers true? Oh, yeah. And then all of a sudden, I can distinctly remember I was out at that baseball field by that field, and we were doing a glass house, teaching CQB, whatever, hip hop training. And all of a sudden, Dot D showed up, and the regular Army showed up, and they're like, where's your POI? Where's your guest book? Where's this? Where's your risk assessment? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm running a course here. And then that's when they found out that we, or SOPC 1, wasn't sending everybody to selection. And that's when they came down and said, you're not a selection course. You're a prep course. Well, me and Rolf were like, no, we're all SF guys that have been on a team. We got a good idea who's going to make it, who's not going to make it. So then they said, no, you have to send everybody that can physically go. So our numbers went from in the 90 percentiles down to the 40 percentile. And then they yelled at us because I was like, what? No, hold on. You made us send everybody. Because before, you could look at a guy and go, this guy ain't going to make it. And for whatever reason, he wouldn't get past SOPC. But then they went, no, you do not have that ability. You must send them forward. And I took the class to lunch at Sharky's as a class. Okay. So that's the adult supervision we had, that our final class, before we would come out of the field Friday morning, go down to the weapons pool, start cleaning the weapons. I would introduce the Bravos to Tony Yost, to the Bravo committee. We would be done cleaning weapons around noon. And then on the training schedule, it said class lunch to be determined, place to be determined, optional attendance. And I set up, Dan Hesseltine set up 2 15-passenger vans with drivers, so we didn't have DWIs. And we went to the strip bar for lunch. And so that's the adult supervision we had. And believe me, one class, the wives were out somewhere, and one wife knew the other wife was a prude. And she said, I can't believe you let your husband go to the class lunch. Oh, it's a class lunch. Yeah. Do you know where it's at? It's at the strip club. She goes to the family support group, throws a fit. So they come down, and they're trying to crush me for it. And Dan Hesseltine says, no, sir. Battalion commander signed off on the training schedule, and it says right here, to be determined, optional. And so we would go to a strip club as a class, because I said, look, you've been through SOPC 1, you've been through selection, I've crushed you in the field for a week, I can teach you how to shoot man, woman, and child in the face, but if I can't show you a titty and a beer before you go home to decompress a little bit, one of you guys is going to get in a fight with your old lady. So it was, as Rolf said, it was all organized with some thought behind it to mean something, even if they didn't realize it. Yeah, okay. Then I built camaraderie. They had a few beers. They'd buy a lap dance or two, and then they'd go home. And believe me, that builds team. That's team building at the NCO level.
So let me just address, I didn't remember the numbers ever going down 40% for graduation rate, but they did decline for a little bit. But the thing was, when they came down and said, you're not the selection, I said, okay, so here's the standard. So this is how it got modified. You went through SOPC 1. I thought this was already kind of there, but it got more formalized, I should say. And everything, you start off in kind of like as cowboys, and then things get more and more regulated. But so it started off as you went through SOPC 1, and we had standards for tests, both written and land nav. If you didn't pass the standards, you got recycled, okay? And so you recycle to the next class, you went through the entire class again with a new class if you got recycled. Technically, though, if you went through the second class and you didn't quit, you got to go to selection, even if you didn't pass the standards. The thing was, we never told the students this. The students were never given this, like, hey, just don't quit, make it. It's like, no, you have to pass, because we wanted them to pass. We wanted them, you don't want SF guys that just cruise through and failing. Like, nobody scores what's the lowest Army PG test, 170 or something like that, Nobody wants a lowest PT score guy with them, right? They want the guy who's trying to get the highest, a 300 or more. If you had the extended scale, they want you to do the extended scale on your PT test, right? We wanted guys to achieve success and meet the standard. So if you didn't quit and if you didn't get hurt, then you went to selection. But I would say pretty much everybody did make it, because when people saw that they were going through the second time, a lot of them would like tap out. And they're just like, no, I did enough gig pits for my lifetime. I'm done. And just so you understand the organization, you had three groups of students. You had AT students, which were awaiting training. They were waiting for the next class to start. Then you had those in class when there's a class going on. And then you'd have OT students, which are out of training. And for a while, we were holding on the OT students. And you got to understand, like, this was a detachment. This detachment would have about 150 students in it. And so you'd have like 30 to 50, or let's say probably 50 to 70 would start a class. And then some were broken from like the P. So you might have a month in between classes. So you're getting students coming in, they're, awaiting training, they're coming from airborne school, they arrive, get them in process, and they're basically just kind of hanging around. And basically, they're doing PT twice a day. They're getting introduced to the instructors, which was me and my cadre. And basically, they're kind of back in like a drill sergeant, private mode, basic training. And so that was going on. I took them to the pool a lot because I didn't want to just beat them down with running every day and, the impact kind of injuries. So we did a lot of pool training, but basically 2 times a day PT and maybe some hip pocket training here and there to keep them busy. But the key being is that you build up that AT pool of students, then you start a course. There'd always be somebody who's broken or hurt or something. I never knew what plantar fasciitis was until I went to SWIC. And people are talking about like, oh, I got plantar fasciitis. I'm like, the fuck is that? So same thing with IT bands, like in your leg. Like, I've been running and gunning it for years, right? It's like running with rucksacks and all this other stuff. I'm like, I never even heard of these injuries. Like, what are you talking about? Anyway, so we had all these students that had all these like issues because they wore boots for the first time in their life, basically like indoor kids that joined the Army. And so now it's like, oh, okay, well, you're going to wait. You're still in a waiting training status as you're a medical hold with this, but you're still AT. You're not starting this course. So then you go through a course and then you graduate, you go to selection. But if you quit, you're out of training and you're done. That meant you're a worldwide assignment. And so we would hold those for a while, and then later on they went over where the student company was, and student company was in support battalion at the time, and it was significantly different then than it is now, but it was what it was. The key being is that those students would then be processed for worldwide assignment. But the first students that would quit, they went to the 82nd, and we filled the 82nd. And the thing about this that was really actually good for the infantry in the 82nd was that they're getting essentially highly motivated guys, even though they just quit this course or failed this course. They got guys who are super in shape and they were ready to be privates, right? And they were told what to do. So they had exceptional soldiership. So we filled the 82nd. Next thing you know, we have students coming that would quit and they'd go over to like whatever the processing was, or we give them their next assignment. And they're like, oh, they basically would go to whatever brigade was getting ready to deploy and was building up. So some guys were going to Hawaii, some guys went to Korea, some guys went to wherever, right? Fort Lewis. They would go anywhere to a brigade that was getting ready to deploy. And what was so funny is you had one guy come over and he was like, hey, Sergeant, I want to quit. And we did try to keep guys from quitting, but I also had in mind, the other half of it, that's half of it. The other half of it was like, yeah, if you want to quit, then quit, right? If you don't want to be here, I'm not going to force you. So a guy would come up and quit. So I'm like, nope, you can't quit by yourself. You got to go find a buddy. Philosophically, he would go back to the barracks and get talked out of quitting. So he would go back to the barracks and guys would be like, oh, you don't want to quit, man. Just stick in it. Because most of these guys went through basic training together, right? So they kind of would have some sort of familiarity with friends in the class. or at least airborne school together. And so they sure as shit, guy'd come back with a buddy. Hey, he wants to quit too. I'm like, well, all right, now we got two. But then one guy quit and he goes over to out processing. He's like, hey, I got Hawaii. So this guy like comes over, like, hey, Sergeant, I want to quit too. Thinking he's going to get Hawaii, goes over like, oh, you're going to Korea. It's like rolling the dice.
God, as a private, that sounds awful.
Two things I
The
definitely
other
want to.
thing, real quick, one thing that goes hand in hand with that, when they were over there, student company, that was over by group headquarters. That was on the main kind of, I mean, it's still all main post, but it was like group was over by what we call the White House area, right? Well, student company was right down the hill from it. So the group sergeant major was would walk down, and I had a couple not run-ins. He actually believed in me and supported me, but he would walk down and be like, "Hey, PFC Schmedlap, what are you doing down here?" And of course, if they're PFC or I don't think we had necessarily E2s, but whatever, E2, E3, sitting down there, he knew they came out of SOPC, so he's like, "What are you doing down here?" He's like, "Oh, they told me I couldn't do this anymore." And so he'd come over to me. He's like, "What's up with this?" And basically kind of bring me the story. I'm like, "Oh, here's the folder. Here's all the paperwork. Failed PT test. Couldn't make a road march." And then he VW'd, right? He quit. So I'm like, the line that he told you is not the truth. And he's like, oh, okay. Once we had like 2 or 3 of those episodes, he understood like, hey, we're tracking all of their scores, all of their progression. We should show them everything from how that student performed so that there was never a part of that student's performance there was never like, hey, you're done, you're out of here, right? So that those guys, and so they were just told like, hey, your worldwide assignment. That is what it is.
Well, somewhere in this conversation, we need to talk about. Well, I'll talk about that real quick. Speaking of quitting, the higher ups say, "Okay, how does somebody quit?" And we're like, "They just quit." It's and one thing I had to stop in the beginning, and I called it performance punishment, because you're on a run, 5-mile run. The first guy comes, he passes the finish line 10, 15 minutes before the next guy or the last guy. And they're smoking him. I'm like, why are you smoking the guy for coming in first? That's performance punishment. And then second, don't smoke the guy that quits, because he's no longer our problem. And they say, well, how do they quit? Well, once they quit, we just process them out. And that's when they came to Dan Hesseltine and how they got this SEAL emphasis. I don't know. They're like, well, the SEALs have to ring a bell to quit. You need to do something like that. I don't know if you remember the old Gong show. It's a
Fuck yeah.
stupid show. Well, in the Gong show, they have a giant gong, Japanese gong thing that they hit to throw you out. Well, Dan Hesseltine went and bought one of them and hung it out, and that's the bell they had to ring. It was a complete in your face to the command, like, get out of our business.
The bell turned into several other inappropriate things over the years after you guys left. Apparently, there was a rock at one point called Mr. Yuck Yuck. There was a giant dildo also that was introduced for a short period of time. I wish I had a list. I had started making a list. That morphed into, well, when SOPC started to change in 2005, 6, and 7, things got a little more abusive. From what I can get from interviews of people, and strange from the Cadre's perspective. But yeah, that gong turned inappropriate over the years.
Well, and so speaking of adult supervision, you talk about the gong and talk about Gunner doing inspections.
So, as these classes got bigger, remember I said there's 2 TACs per class. And then the TAC that was primary basically got to take 2 weeks of leave when his class was in selection. And then the guy who was assistant became the primary. So you got to see a class, then you got to do a class, right? But then the classes started getting so big that, and we got more cadre in too. The class got so big that instead of having, the one class was essentially one platoon, that we graduated to 3 platoons. So you had 3 different platoons of anywhere from 40 to 60 guys. And as it got bigger and bigger, those 3 platoons each got bigger. Like I said, this is a detachment, and we got up to like at one time. So the first year I was a TAC. The second year I was the NCOIC of the whole thing. And the third year, I was a senior TAC. So while I was the NCOIC in the second year, this is a detachment led by a sergeant first class, and I had 350 students under my control. So organization was demanding, and I have spent a lot of long hours there. Rarely did I go home. Plus, as a NCOIC, I'm going over to check on SUT, SOPC 2. I'm going out to Land Nav, check on them. And each section had their NCOIC, and they pretty much ran their show, right? The land nav NCO, I knew what he did. Even when I was attacked, I'd be like, we knew what they did. We'd hand them off to those guys. They would run their thing. And they weren't about smoke shows and that stuff. They were just teaching land nav. They still suck because they're in the woods, but they're just teaching land nav. And like Nate had the SOPC 2, SUT side, he just taught tactics, right? Dismount patrolling, ranger tactics to these guys so they would be prepared for the Q course. So the TACs, while they're in SOPC 1, were pretty much the main source of like laying scunion on these guys. So when we had them in formation, so when they came up with the gong idea, which I think came from the lieutenant, so what they didn't want them to be able to do is on day one quit, and then they just walk away. They're like, no, they have to stay 1 week. They have to go through 1 week's worth of training. So like, okay, and then the Monday of the second week, you pulled the gong up there, and we had a PT stand because you had such a huge formation. We had essentially a raised platform or a PT stand. So you're standing up there, a couple steps leading up to it, and that's where I would address the entire formation. Or we'd had cadre we had 2 cadre, well, at least one cadre per platoon that then ran their students, right? And then I would be over them, like when we're in formation. And this would be like in prep to get on trucks to go to, Land Nav was right there, or we go to the northern training area. And so maybe we get on trucks to do that or whatever we do, right? But they'd be in formation with the rucksacks or something like that. And so I would speak to the entire class, and I had the cadre that didn't reinforce it. But I did this entire time, though. We're trying to get, going back to how it morphed later on with the gong. Like I wanted to make sure it stayed professional. So like the cadre were, and this was a thing at the time, spits and starches when we were not going to the field, and that they were professional in their interaction with the students. But for the gong, so they introduced the gong as a way to try to keep students from just quitting day one. So they had to do the first week. And then Monday of the second week, and this is all kind of more garrison stuff, right? We're teaching land nav during the day and teaching some other classes. We teach it like the thing in tax we teach, like how to prepare your boots for, like, we talk about modifying your boots so they're more comfortable, right? Because most everybody just had jungle boots at the time. So we're like, hey, take them down on the Yankton Road, take that Mel spike out, make them more comfortable, blah, 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 right? So we would give them coaching advice on that kind of stuff. And there's actually classes about how to prep, how to wear socks, like how to, nutrition, hydration, the whole 9 yards, right? So that's the kind of thing that TACs were giving. Land Nav were giving Land Nav courses, but this is all in prep before they started really doing Land Nav hardcore. But the key being was that the gong was introduced and so Monday of the second week, you could get out of the course by ringing the gong. We would have a fucking line of 50 fucking guys standing in line. The entire formation would just stand there, and each guy had to step up to the gong, say what his name was, why he's quitting, and then ring the gong. And it'd be like, oh, Specialist Schmidlap, I'm really tired of being here, and I want to see my girlfriend. Bong. Next dude. And this would go on for 50 fucking dudes until they all, and then every day at that first formation, like 9 o'clock formation, not PT, you had to do PT. And then that was also made so that there was the only time you could quit was at the gong show, is what they called it. So you could quit there. If you didn't quit at the gong show, you couldn't quit until the next day. And this was all to reinforce guys to stay in the course, right? To keep them in. You want to keep them in. And I believed in that. But also when people have gotten to that point where they're like, I'm divested from this, well, then it's really hard to bring it back into it, right? So anyway, these guys quit. They would get out processed, and that's when they became OTs. And so then that class would load up and go do whatever the training event was that day, and continue on with their day. So, but then we'd have, we'd have guys come up to us like, "Sergeant, I want to quit." It's like, nope, can't quit till tomorrow. I don't know if that ever kept anybody in, but it was kind of funny to see this thing happen. And then Nate mentioned my dog. Part of those 9 o'clock formations would typically be like, somebody forgot something, because it'd be typically like not layout inspections, but like spot inspections by the cadre. So somebody forgets something. So either he would pay, typically push-ups or flutter kicks, either by that one platoon or the entire class. And there's different variations of physical fitness that they would go through when they were essentially in a punishment mode. But I had a dog who was a Weimaraner, and his name is Gunner. So Gunner was with me every day, and he was around for 14 years. At that time, he was around for a third of my life and 2/3 of my career by the time he passed away. And he passed away when I was over in Germany. Well, anyway, he was a young buck at that time, so he's like 3 years old, maybe 4 years old. So he's really energetic. And he's basically like a German short hair kind, really energetic hunting dog. But he's all gray, and so he would run around. And so one of the cadre would say, "Gunner, find a quitter." So Gunner would run around and go running through the rucksacks while they're doing like flutter kicks. And one of the things that was kind of funny, especially if they had him doing one of the things we'd have him do is like a circle. They would be doing a bear walk where you're on all fours. And I don't know why he would do this, but he would like run up and start grabbing on the cargo pockets on their BDU pants and start like kind of like just like roughhousing with it. And so that kind of turned into like, Gunner, go find a quitter. So philosophically, he's like, he'd run around, and if he found somebody, he started like grabbing on their cargo pockets, like, "Oh, you're going to be the next one to quit, aren't you?" And so it'd be kind of like this. And then the other guys would be like, man, the other students would start digging into that guy, like, "The dog found you, man. You're going to be quitting." So I feel like there's some stories out there, things that happen. I'm like, I don't know. One guy's like, "Oh, that dog would run around and piss on all the rucksacks." I'm like, I don't remember him pissing on any rucksacks. But anyway, there's a lot of, people have, some of these stories, the fish stories got pretty big at sometimes. But anyway, Gunner was with me every day at work. And one of the other funny challenges, just talking about him. So when I had my office, especially when I was a senior TAC, I had a pretty big office on the first floor. We're still in these World War II barracks. And so I had a pretty big office, and he would sleep under my desk. So one of the students, waiting string students, would just do all the chores, right? They would clean the shitters and empty the trash and mop the floors for us as cadre and all that stuff. So one of the challenges in the student population was you had to be the one to go empty the trash in Sergeant Jensen's office, because my dog felt like any place that was his home was his to defend. So he'd be underneath my desk, and again, it's a pretty big office. It's several steps to get to my desk, which is in the back wall. And so they'd have to get to my trash can, which was next to my desk, which is where my dog was, and get out of the room before they got chased by the dog. Anyway, so he would chase after the students, and that's the way it worked.
Talk about it being our worst enemies. The Northern Training Area, basically, when the Guard was running the program, they used the Northern Training Area to do training. But now that active duty said, okay, you guys can now have the Northern Training Area. And they didn't care about it. And I forget what lake it is on, but the Rockefellers had given it to the Army, I don't know, World War I, World War II, or whatever. And there was an old hunting cabin on it. Well, we went in there and basically refurbished this cabin, built the Land Nav Corps, and it was almost a vacation spot. You wanted to have Guard duty on the weekend because you could go out there and ATV, bring your family, barbecue, fish in the lake or what. And then after a while, then range control said, "Oh, you guys got to start requesting the Northern Training Area because other units want to use it now." And we're like, hold up. You gave it to us because nobody wanted it. It was a piece of shit. Now that we've built it up to something that we can use and we built it the way we want it, we have to request our own training area. It was stupid. But
range control loves to have control of everything once they hear
and
about
then,
it.
So once they got past me on SOPC 2, now they're going to go over to student company and actually be introduced into the Q course. Well, that's when I said, okay, guys, everybody knows about you and they've seen you, but now you're going to actually be introduced. So on that first formation, they would be starch and shine, bags and baggage inspected, all their academics were straight, their medical were straight, and we would just do a turnover to student company. And they got to the point where they would rather deal with our students because they knew they had no medical issues, they had no family problems, they had no pay problems. And Rolf can attest to this. At one point, we had I don't know if it was a full-blown doctor, but we went from getting out of the elevator at the Puzzle Palace with a checkbook to they actually had a full med center, I believe a full-blown doc, because MEPS would not give more than an airborne physical. So some of these guys, when they showed up, they would fail an SF physical. And actually one kid challenged it and he got out of the Army because he's like, "No, I'm not going worldwide because I signed a contract I'm not eligible to sign," because they wouldn't get an SF physical till they got to SOPC. It was logistic, but once we got through all that administratively, when they were turned over student company, they were squared away and ready to train.
You have to understand, it was a whole compound there. We had our admin offices, we had a gym, we had our own dining facility with our own civilian workers. We had truck support. As I mentioned, the classes got bigger and bigger. I mean, the barracks.
In arms room?
Here's a funny story. So this had been the replacement depot for the 82nd. They call it Repo Depot. This would have been where if you got assigned to the 82nd, whether you came out of AIT or Airborne School, or you were coming in from the 101st or wherever you came from, you went there first. And so they had these World War II barracks. Some were open bay, some were made into like 2 or 4-man rooms, and some were like individual rooms. But we couldn't do that with this class. So we basically had probably like a 4 or 6 month project where if you're an awaiting training student, you're on a construction crew. And we turned because we knew we were getting all these more students in as we were evolving, we had to turn all these barracks into every barracks had to look the same. So we made them all open bay barracks. And so we took down all these walls, and then we re-sheetrocked areas that were missing it and made them all nice. Got 2 air conditioning units 4 per floor, because 2 on each side. So they had air conditioning units, open bay barracks, wall lockers. They also had a little foot locker. And then, and so we built this out. But I mean, this was like an ongoing construction project that's like, you're kind of building the plane in flight. I know it's said a lot, but it's like, this is literally like on one side, like while I was at NCO-led, I'm running a crew of dudes over here, and they're doing these barracks, right? And then I've got, Cadre running students through classes. I've got SUT classes going on out of the Northern Training area. I've just got, you got multiple events going on in different factions. And so it's like, I think you're trying to coordinate, and I'd have to go up to battalion command, if not group command, to coordinate for trucks to get them out to training. Because one of the things we would do is we would truck them out to Camp McCall, and they would do the Nasty Nick, so they got to see it, which I don't know if they still do that. I'm sure they do, but I kind of felt like that was an unfair advantage, because like, hey, you got to see part of the selection process before other soldiers coming from like the regular army, but it was what it was. But so like coordinating all the transportation and all that other stuff going on, it became quite a feat. And then again, we didn't have like most of the cadre were all with the students, right? So you only had like a couple guys doing a bunch of all the other stuff and tracking all those students. And so this is like a major endeavor to build out barracks and prep them and get, purchased, or however they did it, getting all those AC units, getting the paint, and just working through that problem set to have that thing stood up and run. And then it turned into a company in my third year. So 2004, 2005, I PCS back in February, something like that. Anyway, I went so I was there 3 years, 2002 to 2005. And and so that turned into a company. It was Echo Company, because it was Echo Company Support Battalion, which I'm sure it's changed into something else. Because that's it. I think they took student company out of support battalion because it sounded bad, like being in a support battalion as an SF guy. The other thing about the cadre that they, while we were there, they were phenomenal, right? Like I had these tacks. I had one guy who is a semi-pro triathlete, and he could run. He could run for forever, right? He was like 3rd in the state as a semi-pro triathlete. I had another guy who was on triple nickel that went into, or I think 595 on that first ODA that horse soldiers. He was one of my other cadre. Phenomenal. I mean, everybody ran at the time. I and pretty much all the tacks, we were all able to run like 6-minute miles for 10 miles. And so there was no issue with like just athleticism amongst all our guys. I had several guys go to scuba school or pre-scuba as cadre when they had a chance. I tried to get them to schools when they had that, if they had a break when students went to selection. And I did try to prioritize their development there. One thing that was not great was that since all you're doing is running students and checking on them, basically being a drill sergeant, like in those 3 years, I never fired a rifle. I never did anything that was like enhancing my career. One thing I did get was I got MFF JM, but otherwise it's like, other things that some guys got in SWIC or even college, that just wasn't really available because you're too busy, too much stuff going on. The development of the whole program was constantly, rising, right? And so, but yeah, so it's like the Cadre were phenomenal, super athletic guys. I knew a guy from 10th group. He had gone through pre-scuba. He didn't go to scuba school ever, but so guys who went to pre-scuba and graduated were obviously in great shape and enjoyed the part of that training where it's like, hey, we're gonna develop these guys, and people were really motivated to develop them, right? And so everybody was just super athletic, super like we had classes as tax, like we taught them how to run, like how their foot should be striking the ground when they're running so that they would understand like this is what you should be feeling, right? And we had such phenomenal cadre that they really embodied the success of the students, of those that were still there. It's like we are going to give you everything we have, 100% and then some, to make you successful in your endeavor. And like I said, trying to make sure that they were protected from, because they would try to take our students for details. I'm like, nope, you don't get them. We have other stuff we're going to train with them. And even if they're in the waiting training, we run hip pocket training. Again, we had it in the course for knots, but we would teach them knots like Ranger School knots, so they understood lashings when they went to selection, and they understood when they went to team week. So everything was prepped or created in a way to prep them for that selection, attendance.
Rolf, you were able to see the guys leaving that pipeline that you guys had built up in 2005-ish. When did you go back and take a team? And what was your perception of the guys coming out of the course that were X-rays when you were a team sergeant compared to the guys you saw leaving the SOPC 2 program?
Yeah, I thought all the guys. So I was trying to count them up the other day, and they're on a bunch of these pictures here right behind me. But I think I had at one time 18 X-rays on my ODA. But the thing was, they were at different levels. Like one guy had already been on the team before I got there, so he was my senior Bravo, phenomenal performer. And again, so I had a dive team, right? And so to stay on that team, I made sure you went to dive school. That was your ticket to stay there. And from that point forward, you would get all the schools I could ever get for you. And so, like, by the time I left there as a team sergeant, so I did 3 years as a team sergeant. By the time I left there, other than two guys who were pretty new, got on the team right before our last trip to Iraq, everybody was a static line drum master. Everybody was a dive supervisor. Both my medics were DMTs. Everybody was dive qualified. Like I said, everybody but the two guys. And I had a 13-man ODA. So the team had gotten so much. Oh, I got one guy through Safari. I got another guy through Sodic. So now SIFSIC. So I really tried to enhance their development. So when I got back, and they were all motivated for it, right? And so when I got to the team back in 2005, it was funny because they would send you everybody who was kind of like a new guy showing up to 10th group. They called it PMT, pre-mission training, but really it's kind of more of just a cephalic. And there was like 5 guys in there, or maybe 8, and they're all SOPC guys because they're all E5s, right? And later on, when you left SOPC, you were an E6, but that wasn't the case at the time. And so they had, and I'll talk about students in a second, but so I walk into the room, they're all kind of chatting it up, like guys do, and they're just kind of waiting for the class to start. So they're in there like maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes before the class is actually supposed to start. And I walk in and put my stuff in the back corner, and they all see me, and they're all like, Jesus. And they all like kind of turned away. So I'm like sitting there for maybe a minute or two. I don't see any like instructors. So I walk over to them. I'm like, hey, you guys see any instructors? They all turned to me, went to parade rest, like, Native Sergeant, we haven't seen anybody yet. I'm just like, all right, let's get this straight right now. That was then, this is now. You're in the fraternity. Just relax. We're all going to go through this training together. We're all assigned to 10th group now. Let's be conscious of the fact that we are all in support of each other now. So I did want to make sure that they broke the mold of student to instructor relationship. Is like, that was then, this is now. And one of the other things about the students, going back to that a little bit, one of the things that we found in the students in terms of like age and or experience, because everybody joins the Army in different ways, shapes, or means, that at the time you could still join the Army at 17 with parents' signature and come to the 18 X-ray program. And what they figured out was that they almost never made it through because they didn't have anything to rely on. They left their parents' couch, joined the Army, and didn't have the wherewithal and the mettle to get through the training. So they eventually changed it to where you couldn't join until I think you're 19 on the 18 extra program, but I wasn't sure. But what we did see is a very statistical pattern was that regardless of age, mainly 18 or above, if you had gone to college, any amount of it, just 1 year, or you had a degree and you faced something like, hey, I got to pull an all-nighter to get this term paper in. Granted, this would be when people still type term paper and stuff, but or hand in hard copies, they didn't just email everything around. But when people went to college and had to face like pulling an all-nighter before a test, or they had a family and they knew they had to put bread on the table for that family, like there's no option. I have to work hard to make sure this thing happens. They had that kind of like an internal drive to make stuff happen. Those guys succeeded. They might still only be 19, but those guys succeeded. But the guys who came off their parents' couch, almost regardless of age, were almost never successful. And so in that light, and Nate referenced this earlier, but we had guys, I had Navy SEALs come through. They'd been in the SEALs, did like a platoon, got out, came over to SF. And then I had MARSOC guys come over, and I had quite a few MARSOC guys come in. And then you had several from just, obviously you had National Guard guys who wanted to come. I mean, we still taught this program for National Guard guys too. And some guys wanted to come over, go through the program, then go active duty. I mean, we're in the throes of initially Afghanistan. In 2003, I was in Halo Jump Master during the invasion of Iraq, watching the TV, just like sulking, like, God damn, I can't believe I'm watching an invasion on TV. Oh, I got to go to class. I'm like, because I had been in after Panama, and then the 90s where nothing really went on. So I literally felt like I was always going to be the bridesmaid, never the bride, in the sense that I missed, Panama. And then when Afghanistan kicked off and 10th Group was ramping up that, I went to SWIC. And now you have Iraq going on. Of course, it's like, man, I'm going to be the only guy in SF without a combat patch. Who knew it was going to go 20 years, right? But I'm like, man, I cannot believe this. And then we had Cadre coming back from like 3rd Group who'd been in Afghanistan. They're telling stories. And we had some 5th Group guys come in and telling stories. Like I said, one of the guys on the very first teams that the 12 Strong movie's based on, he was one of my Cadre. And he's with the Horse Soldier Bourbon stuff now. And then another guy who was on Triple Nickel was there. He was a medic. And, a bunch of these guys were phenomenal guys. And they're coming back with these stories. I'm just like, oh, man. So I didn't get over to combat until 2005 in 10th Group when I'm already in E8, right? It's like, so it's like, finally I got over there. It's like, but then again, who knew there was going to be 20 years of combat for this whole thing? So, but it was depressing to watch, first of all, Afghanistan from Fort Bragg, and then the invasion of Iraq from Yuma, Arizona, while I'm in class and going to go learn jump master duties or something,
Yeah,
How
I
about
had
you,
an
Nathan?
opportunity to volunteer to go to Afghanistan from SOPC, and I jumped on it. So that's why I didn't I was only there from December 01 to May of 03, and then I jumped on an Afghanistan tour. But on the very first class of them 13 or whatever, he was like a PFC still when he graduated. He was 18 Charlie, and he was the overall, the 18 Charlie honor grad, and he was a senior leadership award for the Q course as a PFC that just came out, and he was one of the very first SOPC guys. So there was some quality people that showed up. And as Rolf said, I got to give this to Adrian Levitt. He actually came up with the name of SOPC. But we would coordinate with SOMTB when the Deltas would come in to do their 2-week refresher, and in their last field phase, they had to do live tissue training. Well, we would marry up with them. So I would do SUT, SUT, SUT. And they're like, okay, we would coordinate for choppers. And like, okay, we're going to do an urban mission. Load them on choppers, move them over to the Mount City. And then they get a couple hours classes of, okay, this is how to clear a room. Then the 18 Deltas would be the SF guys. The X-rays would be their indige. They would clear the city. And once they cleared the city, then they became Haji, and they actually sat there and aided the 18 Deltas. So these guys had 6 months in the Army and they're doing live tissue training. So we did everything that we could in any way, shape, or form to stuff something in their head because we knew that they were going to combats with our team brothers. So yeah, there was no limitation of what we taught, how we taught, anything from this is how you tie a knot to this is how you tip a stripper.
This is how you tie a knot, and this is how you tip a stripper. That should be I'm sure that's written down somewhere on the back of a Foot Locker. Okay, so I mean, you obviously built something for the long run because now I've said this in the comments before, and some people shit on me for it, but the only reason Special Forces is still alive is because of the 18 X-ray program, or we would be at 3 groups probably. We would have had to go down to 3 groups probably without it. But that's what I'm getting from some of the other people that are higher enlisted in things. But where do you think this is going to go forward? And how do you think about it looking back on those times and how it was so important to where we are now?
I'll answer quick first and say, so I wasn't sure so I knew a guy who had been on my team years before, had gone in his twilight tour before retirement, and he had gone to be cadre, and he had talked about how it changed. And it was really the TACs were just administrative guys. They just kind of formed them up and made sure their paperwork was right. And there was no like gig pits, and there was no other, there was none of the discipline that was really being enforced. They just went out, and so they just got classes, and they went out and they basically tried to make SOPC much more like selection, but with instruction. And so I thought that sort of dumbed it down a little bit or watered it down because they didn't come out of that. And there have been stories of guys showing up to groups not being as solid as, 18 X-rays not being as solid as that ones they had seen previously, but I can't confirm or deny that stuff because it's like, hey, I know what we did, and I had not really heard a lot about it, and I honestly wasn't sure if it was still going on or not. I did hear things where some commanders, like I had a battalion commander when I was in Germany, say like, "Oh, that 18 extra program was a failure because guys come in they come in, they do it for a couple of years, and they leave." It's like, well, I disagree clearly because I think we filled the need to get guys into the ranks in a rapid fashion with good dudes, right? Like only the best were going to get through SOPC one, and then selection, and then continue on and get through the Q course. So young or old, like we had, like I mentioned, like guys came from other services. I also had guys come, they were like Wall Street bankers. Like I had 28-year-olds, 26-year-olds joining. Like they're like, hey, and the thing was, they were like, I want to join the Army, but I don't want to join be like your story where you went to the regular Army first before coming to selection. They're like, I will join the Army if I can go straight to selection. And they did. So that opportunity brought guys in that otherwise would not have joined because they're a little older, sort of had more experience in life. And they're like, oh, but I can if I can at least get the chance to go be special ops right away, I'll join the Army. And I think, based on my confidence, I think I can make it, right? Not all of them did, but that's what they thought. So that brought them in. So you had this later on, what came were a lot more younger people, like the 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds. And I think we had already exhausted that pool of 28-year-olds that wanted to go chase an SF tab or a Green Beret. So I think it should continue. I think it will be a never-ending debate as to how that should be run, whether it be run the way I ran it or the way it's been run since I left. And I think they will always. I think it's even being run out at Camp McCall now. So, like I said, I felt like if you're going to selection from the regular Army, like I didn't know what Camp McCall looked like. I'd never been to Fort Bragg. So it was all new to me. Like there's the aura, and this is why like guys that go a second time, not that it's a negative or anything, but you go the second time, the aura or the mystique of selection is over because you've been to McCall. You went through at least some portion of the training, and for whatever reason you're not there, you got to see it, right? You got to see part of it. You essentially got your own internal G2. And so if you're at McCall as a SOPC guy or 18 X-ray, then you're seeing all the event, you're seeing the buildings, you're seeing the post, you're seeing the nasty nick, and you're getting a chance to live selection before you're in selection. So it's like, well, that's not a mystery anymore. That's not something you have to mentally overcome. And then if you also make it easier where it's just right time, right place, right uniform, it's like, well, now you're relying on whatever their personal experience is before, plus whatever the military gave them, which we all know that base training, NIT, and airborne school is not going to do anything more than give them a foundational understanding of the military, foundational physical fitness, and there it is, you know. So anyway, I hope it continues. I think it's probably needed for the regiment, and I would like it to be, didn't have to be as extreme as it was when I did it, but something akin to it, and probably not on Camacall, but clearly space is always limited on Fort Bragg, and it's not my choice. And the funny thing about those barracks, I went back there. So the last time I've been to Fort Bragg was 2016, and I went to those barracks, and they were all being condemned, like being demolished, right? And I think it's McKellar's Road and whatever, that one that goes right in front of where the 82nd does their pass review, you know, big ceremonies. The barracks had all this tape around them saying like asbestos and, you know, plastic over them. I'm just like, huh, all right, well, we'll see where this turns out in 20 years. But yeah, everything was condemned, asbestos, couldn't enter without like a full mop suit on, and, you know, respirator and the whole 9 yards. I'm like, oh, well, that's where we all lived for 3 years.
Well, you'll be testifying to Congress about it, and hopefully in a few years about the 18
Yeah.
X-ray living conditions. What do you think, Nathan?
Yeah, well, there was actually, let's say, I just think he was an E6 or whatever, and part of his rebuttal when he was getting kicked out of the Q Corps or out of SUT, that the SOPC kids had an unfair advantage. And I'm like, wait, you've been in the Army 6 years. They've been in the Army maybe 9 months, okay? So you had the opportunity to teach yourself. But it also goes back to, they had no good or bad habits. We just taught them what we thought would work, especially SUT's SUT. I mean, it's Ranger, Ranger, Ranger. And I know there's a lot of people in SF Command, and probably after this show, they are not going to like this statement. Of the initial cadre, once again, the majority of them, like I said, they were either scuba guys or pre-bat boys. And they had a specific mindset that our job is to train, and I'll tell you, I disagreed with it, but hey, it's not my decision. I'm going to do it because that's what I'm ordered to do, but I'm going to produce the best soldier I can because I know they are going to be on a team in combat with my current brothers. And I took that to heart. And I think they lost that about, I'd say around 2008. And I can't even guess because I came back from Afghanistan in 04, visited a little bit, and I could see when it was growing. But then it started being an assignment, they didn't pick and choose a cadre or somebody volunteered or a guy brought in his buddy. It was just another, okay, you're SWIC. Here's go SOPC. All right, I'm in SIC. I don't care. I'm going to get back to group as soon as I can. So I think they lost a lot of the camaraderie, but more than that, there's not that emphasis that these guys are going to war with my buddies in like maybe the day after they graduate the Q course because the team they're assigned to is already in combat. So that's what happens when you have a 20-year war.
Yeah. And things get forgotten. Roles change, attitudes change. The people that we select to go through the Q course, generally all the same, but I've got a long brief on the things that got us to where we are now and then the situation that we're in dealing with mental health crisis and some other things like that. That's for a different show. It's very depressing and it's not a very positive outlook. I just wanted to, I kind of lost track in sitting and talking to you guys because it was just great to listen to all these stories of how you guys were dealing with creating the program.
Yeah, we haven't even got to that. I mean, me and Rolf literally couldn't go to a bar in 50 miles of Fort Bragg without somebody sending a drink over. Because it was like,
hey,
yeah.
To that point, I was PCSing away, doing a ditty move, driving a rental truck, towing my vehicle behind. And I took a southern route because it's wintertime. So I stopped in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, just because that's where it fell on the map and how long I was going to drive that day. I walk into some bar, that's the town around University of Alabama, which didn't actually plan it that way, but just worked out that way. So I go into this bar, college bar, and no shit, some guy comes up, he's like, hey, Sergeant Jensen. And he was a fifth group guy from Alabama who was on vacation or on leave, whatever. He comes over and starts talking to me. I'm just like, oh, what's up, man? I didn't know him. And that's one of the things that was kind of funny. Like, remember I said 2,000 students a year, 3,000 students second year, 4,000 the next year. And there's so many of them, I couldn't remember them unless they were either like super capable or really a dirtbag. I didn't really remember anybody's name, right? But they would remember me, so they'd come up and see like Nate or me in a bar. Me and Nate were hanging out. I mean, me and Nate were living together, riding Harleys together. Cul-de-sac was like a cross between uh, like
Animal House.
yeah, Animal House and hedonism. And it was pretty much just wild and fun. And so our off time was super fun. And our, but then we worked hard. It's like work hard, play hard, party hard. So we took it serious that we wanted to be the best cadre. We were going to make sure that those guys were prepped, as he said. And I just think the effort level was 100% and then some to make sure they were ready.
At that time, SWIC wasn't seen as it because it changed to be because nobody knew how long the war was going to last, right? SWIC was like, oh, I have to go do it. At some point, it went to I don't fucking want to go to SWIC, where there was a different attitude towards the beginning of the 2000s of like, no, this is something I have to do, and career progression of being a Green Beret. So things were a lot different, and things changed as the war went on, and the fear of missing out.
I didn't want to go. My unit was getting ready for combat, and I'm like, I'm not included in that, right? So it's like clearly that wasn't what I wanted to do. But that just like, well, once I'm there, especially because I had the autonomy. Because what I did know was like my buddies who were working over in SUT. Because remember, as I mentioned earlier, the way the senior leadership in the training group thought was like, once you get through selection, you're good to go, right? And so you should make it through the Q course. Like clearly, you should just make it through the Q course. And so when a cadre member would grade a student in SUT in the Q course and say like, and he wanted to fail him, they would pull that cadre member on the carpet and like kind of grill him like he's the one that's in trouble as to why that student shouldn't pass instead of like bringing the student in. And then I brought the student in too, but I do know I had a guy, SUT instructor's like, bro, this SUT, because they again, you could see, especially if you could see that you had a good background from the infantry and then went SF, and then you could see the guys were clearly not leaders. They were soft personalities or didn't have resiliency to man up or step up or couldn't be tough in the field. You're like, that guy's not going to make it. Maybe we should recycle them. They're like, why do you want to recycle them? Right? Because they have numbers to produce. And Manny Deemer was the group commander at the time. And he came down to us. He's like, hey, man, everybody wants to say it's not about numbers. I'm telling you, it's about numbers. And we got to get people into the force. And this kind of goes back to what I said about before. It's like, and I got that, right? And it's like, okay, I will support your effort, right? But it doesn't mean I'm going to make it, but I'm not going to make it easier. So I'm going to support the effort with the best that I can produce. So it was it was a great time because once we got there, even though it's like, again, I guess it's also about attitude, right? It's like, I don't want to be in SWIC, but I'm in SWIC. So I'm going to make the best of it. I'm going to do everything I can, especially once I got the mission statement of like, get these guys ready. Going back to everything Nate said, I got to get them ready to be on a team with brothers, and they can't be shitbags. So I take that to heart. I will always want to produce the best of anything. I wanted to produce the best for myself in terms of like, I want to go to every school. I want to do the hardest things. I want to reach the highest levels. I want to reach the highest rank. Like, I didn't want anything to ever be short stroked or not go after the highest peak that I could. So, I mean, that's why I served 34 years, right? And honestly, I would not have gotten out if they didn't tell me like, bro, you're done. Like, assignments and positions are not available anymore. I'm just like, but I can still do it.
Yeah.
I wasn't broken to that point where I couldn't do PT and lift weights and hang with the guys. I mean, one of the things I did when in the Group S3 was when Cephalic had their stress shoot for Carson, we have range 9, which basically belongs to 10th group, and it's a flat range. And it's like, I don't know, a couple mile run. I would kit up at lunch and run to range 9, do the stress shoot, and then run back to group and then like take a shower and finish my day out and stuff, right? But it's like I was still in the mix. And so that's why I was like, but I don't want to get out. And they're like, nope, it's time.
Yeah. And there's something that keeps you coming back too. So go ahead.
I was knee 8, been on the 9 like list for 3 years, and I was waiting for the slot because I was sent to Texas to stand up Camp Bullis. And I wanted to take the company. But they finally said, nope, you're either taking an infantry battalion, going to the Pentagon, or going back to SWIC. And I said, I'm getting out. But you got to realize our students We had guys that were the captain of football team that got the cheerleader and had a degree, to guys that were still virgin and never been in a fist fight. And they actually sent the SUT cadre, their command, to watch one of my classes, a raid we did. And then they pulled me aside with the battalion commander, and they're like, "Why ain't you grading the students?" And I'm like, "I'm teaching small unit tactics. As long as they're not violating the principles of patrolling and your instructor knows what tactics are, I don't need to teach a test, because this is a tactic or a technique. I'm teaching the technique you want to see." And we actually had SUT change their technique, because the one they were seeing was violating the principles of patrolling. But that's what I told the battalion commander. I'm not teaching a test. This is tactics, small unit tactics. Don't violate the principle of patrolling, accomplish the mission, and you should get a passing grade. So they even changed how they were evaluating SUT based on SOPC 2, because of the success rate we were having in SOPC 2, not just selection. Because the cadre out there, they had to follow, what was it, the Bravo team leader? They created some bullshit that the Bravo team leader had to count people off the objective on an ambush, period. And if he didn't do that, he failed. And I'm like, show me where that falls under the principles of patrolling.
Yeah, no, it was worse than that. They would do the first fire in a hole, and let's say you had Alpha team and Bravo team, right? So left side's Alpha team. They like first fire in a hole, Alpha team. They would, instead of them like crossing back across the objective, they would have them stack on the assistant team leader to then be counted across, which basically gave the assistant team leader or this assistant squad leader, whatever it was, that basically gave him a job to do, like a block to check. And where this came in was, I feel like we had Cadre come in who came from whatever MOS, but didn't know actual dismount patrolling, small unit tactics, and didn't know how to actually look at a patrol and know if somebody's doing good or bad, either as an individual or as a leadership position. And so they couldn't assess right from wrong. So then they had to give the cadre a means to assess students, and then students had a means to understand that they're being assessed and but it became a check the block thing that completely violated the principles of patrolling, because there wasn't security at all while dudes are stacked on the ambush line like they're about to enter a house. Like, this is the dumbest thing ever. And one other thing about Cadre that I'll just say, and I like the guy, and I'm not going to say his name, but this is one time I saw something that I blew my mind, because philosophically, as a Cadre, as a SWIC instructor, sergeant first class, you're in SWIC because you went through the Q course, you went to a team, you had X number of years doing JSS, deployments, whatever. You did SF guys stuff. And then, hey, time came, your turn to be in SWIC, to be an instructor, get back to the force. Not unlike the infantry, it has to go be drill sergeants or recruiters, something like that. So you come to SWIC and you're going to serve somewhere within the SWIC arena and give back to the force by teaching students. And you teach them based on your experience as an SF guy. Well, we had a guy, and he was a active duty MP who then went in the National Guard SF. And you can just be in an SF unit, not be SF, and just kind of keep hanging around until you get an SF tab. So eventually he makes it through the Q course, and he's in the Guard. And then he and if you're AGR, I don't know if it's the same way now, but as it's explained to me, because I was never really around the Guard or AGR, but if you're an E5 and there's an E7 slot available, you can just go to that slot, and then now you're 7. And so it's like, you didn't go through like ANOC or any of the other courses to get you to that point, but it's like, well, you're filling an E7 slot, so now we're just going to essentially frock you or make you an E7. And so this guy had been, like I said, active MP, National Guard SF, comes AGR, goes to SWIC, pins 7, and he's never been on ODA. And so I was like, with that philosophy, like, hey, you're supposed to be on ODA and then come back and give back to the force with your knowledge and experience. Now I'm like, how is this even possible? Like, so all you're telling me, and remember, you have to go through a course called, at least at that time, called Instructor Training Course, ITC, to certify you as an instructor. So I'm like, so all you need to be an instructor or cadre at SWIC is a long tab and ITC. Is that what I'm getting here? And I was so frustrated with like some of the stuff like that, where I'm like, what are we doing to vet people coming in? But again, he wasn't a bad guy. It's just that I was so frustrated that some guys were getting in to be SWIC instructors in front of these very malleable and young soldiers that are going to see SI guys for the first time. And I'm like, why are we putting these guys in front of these soldiers at this point in their career? You know what I'm saying? I was just like, we got to figure something out. We got to adjust the way the cadre are getting selected. Like it kind of almost became a little bit of a selection to get into that SOPC program at that time.
You guys are wearing me out here. So much information.
I
I'm
used
gonna watch this one back and have to make notes.
I got to tell you
For
one
one
fast funny
example, like-
story. Hold on, I got one quick story. I got ahead of you. So one time we had a student come through. He'd been active duty. He was a 13 Fox prior service, had come back on active duty. He was served a regular 4-year tour. He was up in your old stomping grounds at Fort Lewis. He said he was in second Ranger time. He had been at Fort Lewis and he had been at 13 Fox. He shows up and he's got a Ranger tab and air assault wings. And so he's in the barracks, and now everybody's airborne qualified, right? So he's got airborne, air assault, and Ranger tab. And he's like, yeah, I was in second Ranger time at Fort Lewis. I'm like, oh, okay. And if somebody shows up like that, you're just like, all right, whatever, get in the class. Well, then later on, students came to me and like, hey, Sergeant Jensen, can I talk to you? I'm like, yeah, like, hey, we don't know everything, but we have another prior service guy in the barracks who isn't Ranger qualified, but he's prior service and he knows about like Ranger school and what Ranger school graduates talk about. And so when we talk to this guy with this Ranger tab, none of the stuff he says makes sense. Like we asked him what class he was in. He was like 48 or something like that, right? And so like just his answers didn't make sense. So I'm like, okay. So we started doing some digging, and it turns out this guy showed up falsely wearing a Ranger tab. But what was funny was I bring him in the office, I'm chewing his ass, but I'm also doing the paperwork because, of course, that's like reams of paperwork. I'm at NCO-led, so this is like reams of paperwork. I have to write the basic, sworn statement, what's going on. This guy did his records, all sorts of stuff, right? And he's standing there parade rest. I'm chewing his ass. I'm typing stuff up. I'm like, why would you even do that, right? And he kind of had some bullshit excuse. I'm like, well, how do I even know if those, like, I was talking about integrity and, honesty and all this other stuff, all the Army values. I'm like, well, how do I even know those air assault wings are correct? And the way my desk was, it was facing forward and I had like my computer off the side. So I'm like, how do I know if those air assault wings are even correct? I go over, I'm like, are those air assault wings correct? And he's like, so I caught him right there red-handed, which he'd already been caught red-handed with a false Ranger tab because he'd already taken the Ranger tab off. That's the thing. He'd already been busted for that. So we're going to, drop him, send him worldwide. But he's still wearing their air assault wings after he'd been busted for the Ranger tab. And I'm just like, this gets even better. I'm like, now I'm just crushing you by words. So yeah, that guy got destroyed. But that's the kind of stuff you experience, like the stuff I never thought I would deal with, just like the medical stuff, like plantar fasciitis, IT bands, AC joints in their shoulders, like hip problems. I'm like, what? You guys sound like a bunch of women. Like, what the hell is going on? And, having to deal with all the administrative things too. Is that's like, so that's why I'm like, there's plenty of times I'm there till 10:30 at night dealing with administrative things. So I'm prepped for the next morning.
Like I would coordinate to have female 4, but I would insert them at night, and they would be on the objective. I always thought it was funny because when they were searching, and then I remember one kid, he's filling the breast. There's something in their pockets or in the pot. Well, how did I teach you to stretch? Rip that fucker off, take it away. And he pulls that off, and her titties fall out, and this student just freezes. And I'm like, what's your problem? It's a girl. And you're not going to have a girl on the objective? Treat her as the enemy. And I thought it was kind of cool, the volunteers we got to show up just to be part of the game and the shit we put them through. Because once again, there was no politically correctness involved.
You guys, when people say back in the day, you guys were the day, right? Back in the day of SOPC and the 18 X-ray program. All right. I think we're gonna wrap this up here for the day. Now on me, I noticed I got lost in listening to your guys' stories here and I wanted to have you guys on just to kind of hear about the inception of the program. So first off, thank you guys for coming on. Is there anything that we missed talking about that we wanted to get to today? Because I've completely lost the plot on how I usually do things. Because it's usually a conversation, but here there's just so much on the topic. Is there anything that we missed that people would want to know about the 18 X-ray program and just you two that you guys wanted to talk about?
So one time these are AT students. So they're not in the course, but they're waiting to go to the course. I'm waiting for more students to come in where they collect up and become a bigger class before officially starting a class. And so I kept telling them all week, hey, clean your barracks. I expected every day, clean your barracks. It's not clean. And they did a half-ass job of cleaning. I'm like, clean your barracks every day. Your barracks isn't clean, clean it. And I tell them like, hey, make sure you get this. And they wouldn't do it. So finally we got to Thursday and I was like, all right. And so we got 5 o'clock formation, release formation, right? And I said, listen up, man. I know you think it's release formation, but here's the deal. I've told you all week you're going to clean your barracks. You didn't do it, not sufficiently. So here's what's going to happen next. You're going to go to chow. You're all going to form back up here at 6 p.m. You're going to proceed to take every piece of furniture out of your barracks. You will then wash it down with a hose, like spray it out, and you're going to dry it out with mops. Oh, and the furniture is going to be set up outside the same way it is inside. And then you're going to clean the barracks, top to bottom, shitters, showers, the whole 9 yards, disinfect everything, and then you're going to put all that stuff back in. Go. So they come back out 6 o'clock. I'm like, okay, there you go. Start. So they start going. Here's what was amazing about that. Guys who I thought were kind of weak, because there's like a skinny guy. He had been around like in the restaurant business for a little bit. He was like a little older, like 24. He'd been like a sous chef or something like that. But that guy rose to the top. He was awesome. He made it through later on, went to, I think, 3rd group or 5th. But when I looked at him, I was kind of like, that guy ain't going to make it, but he showed himself. He showed his true colors and was super, right? It really made some guys rise up. So the key thing is that they start that thing at 6 p.m., start hauling stuff out, lockers, the whole night, every bag, everything, setting it out in the grass while guys start cleaning and sweeping and mopping and got the hoses out. They're washing. So this thing proceeds to take until about 4 in the morning. And so they work all night, nonstop until 4 in the morning. And then I said, and so it gets all put back together. And I'm like, and we have formation. I'm there awake the whole time. I didn't sleep. And my assistant didn't sleep either. So we're there and it's like, okay, it's like 4:30. I go, okay, go to sleep. PT formation, got them up at 6:30, got them in formation at 6:30, and I slept in my office. So I mean, this is kind of like the dedication. Like, I'm not trying to go home. I'm here to fucking make sure these guys are doing the right thing, that they're achieving the standard that I set out for them. So, get up after whatever 2 hours of sleep, 2.5 hours sleep. They form up. They're in formation. It was literally like, right face because I did a lot of the scuba school thing too. It was like you're stretched before you're in formation. So it's like, so when I came out there and called them to attention, it was literally like, class, attention, right face, forward march, double time march, and you're off. You're on a run. So that was that, right? You just started running. And I would set the pace. I'd be in the front of the formation. So I'd set the pace. So as we're marching, I would move to the front of the formation. I'd call over my shoulder like double time march. And I took them on a run, 4-mile run back there in the woods, brought them back. And then I think I only kept them for I think I only did that and maybe brought them back after chow, had 9 o'clock formation, and then released them. So it was really kind of like half day kind of thing. But it was like the message, and I'm sure I said it in some way, shape, or form, was like, do not short stroke the standards. Do not, fail to achieve the standards that are being set out in front of you. And that class did phenomenal. You guys loved it. But here's what was funny. I didn't know it, but because of some other event where the students had gone on like a detail, they had been given like a 3-day pass. And so they've been planning to take Friday off, but they were planning to take off to go to like Raleigh at like 5 p.m. at release formation. And I made them stay overnight to do the barracks. So they had to work that half day. And then they started their pass. And I actually told them, because one of the guys was prior service, and he brought that up to me like after he graduated and stuff, or like when he was in SOPC too. He came up to me, he's like, hey, do you know that we had a pass that day? I'm like, sorry about that. My bad. Yeah. Oh, well, hey, you learn something about your teammates, right? So it is what it is. So there it was. But yeah, it was, but that's the kind of stuff. It was like, it wasn't just to mess with. I didn't just wake up and think that's what I'm going to do. But I did think like, hey man, you're not going to like what you'll face if you don't achieve the standards that I've set out for you. And they didn't. But like I said, they had several guys rise to the top out of that class and become stellar performers. I'll just say, I think that Nate and I's friendship that started day one in the Bravo course and has existed and lasted to this point is really at least a part of the foundation as to why that worked is because like here's the thing that I always had is like a philosophy in general is that like I had a friend of mine, he was a captain. Short story. So the very first ever Special Forces underwater operations competition was held back in like 2001. And there's a 4-man team that would do this basically 18-hour event. Well, 10th group won it. And the guy that was on that team was a captain at the time. Well, fast forward to when I'm the group S3 sergeant major back here in Colorado. And he was the DCO as a full bird colonel. But if I still knew him as Brian. And so if Brian and I were having a conversation, or he needed something done, I wasn't doing it because the colonel, the DCO asked me to do it. I'm doing it because Brian asked me to do it. And I don't want to let Brian down. Right. And so the same thing with Nate. And I felt like even if I wasn't as close with all the other cadre, it was the same thing. Like, I'm not letting any of the cadre down. I'm not going to show them that I'm not going to maintain the standards that I expect of them. And I always said this in my leadership positions. When I stood in front of a formation, it doesn't matter if I was a team sergeant, when I was a first sergeant, company sergeant major, or even if I was leading the staff, my first day or first introduction to that element, I would give them a spiel about, motivation and being, doing their jobs and all this other stuff. But I would always end it with like, I will always set the example for you. If you ever have a question of what right looks like, look at me. I will always set the example for you to look at and know what is correct. And so in that essence, the same thing like we're with Nate, I wouldn't want to let Nate down, and I didn't want to let the other cadre down, and I didn't want to have any part of the course be thought of by students as like, that was bullshit or that was canned. And the students had a chance to write critiques at the end of it, right? And I took some of those. I took those every class and like saw where there could be adjustments because obviously there's some critiques or comments that are nothing, but there were ones where one time we were just short of cadre and the students, while I had to do some admin stuff, basically sat outside in formation waiting to get on trucks. And I'm like, yeah, that could have been better used, right? So it's like I did self-reflection and try to look at how I was performing both for the cadre and for the students to provide the best class ever. But yeah, there's just like a lot of effort into going above and beyond because again, Nate's not Sergeant First Class Dial that, oh, he's the SUT NCOIC. It's like, no, that's Nate. That's my buddy. And, we're roommates. We're riding Harleys together and, going downtown, going to the beach, whatever, that when we had time off, we were hanging out together too. So it was like, it was much more of a camaraderie thing.
What do you think, Nate?
And I'm not the stud that Rolf is by far. And there's times that he would lock me up per se going, hey, your uniform's a little, and I'm like, Roger that, but then we go home and that night and the business is business. You were right. I was wrong. Let's move on forward. It's never affected us because we're professional like that. But a lot of students they was like, we knew that you care. Even no matter how bad the situation, the cadre at SOPC at that time cared not only for the student, but for the regiment, because this is going to be our future. I knew that I was influencing the regiment as a whole, and I wanted to take pride in that. And the students did know we cared for them. No matter how bad we smoked them, dogged them, ran them in the dirt, unless they were shitbagged and then they were in a different category, they knew we were generally there to make them a success the best that we could. And by making the student the best success that we could, we're influencing the regiment to stay the best because they are the future.
Yeah, this goes hand in hand with the idea of like serving a greater good. I mean, when you're in the military, you're serving a greater good because you're serving for the nation, but then truthfully, you're serving more so for those on your left or right when it comes down to it. Part one. Part two is the fact that in the essence of like what Nate says, like I'm serving the regiment, like I'm making the regiment better. I'm going to be, my motivation comes from the existential, production that's going to happen here. Like I'm going to be helping out all of the regiment, not just my group or other groups or so. And the other thing I wanted to provide for those students, like at the time, I was lifting a lot of weights. I looked a lot like you do now, Nick, was the fact that I was lifting a lot of weights, and this again going back to like having sleeves rolled. I remember one student said they had been down there with the Ranger Regiment guys, and they're I guess in some way similar. So like, oh, we're going to SF, it's going to be easier. And I stepped in front of them, and I had arms at least somewhat similar to yours, and I had the sleeves rolled up. And the way the sleeves rolled up was it got to that junction between your deltoid and your bicep, and it kind of almost became like a semi tourniquet. And so then it just improved your biceps, especially if you just came out of the gym. And so I stood in front of the brand new guys, very, uh, very direct, very concise, very assertive. And they were just like, oh shit, now we're just got back to like, we thought we left the frying pan, but we just got back into another frying pan. And so it was great to be able to step in front of those students and just present like the image of this, hey, SF guys are fit, they're in shape, and then we're out there every day smoking their bags. We used to take them on these, 7-8 mile runs, that kind of stuff. So, and we're there with them. We're leading the way, that we're setting the pace for them the whole time, and just everything about it. Right. And then, all of it, right. Cadre were there with them through it. And so we weren't ever the guys that would be like, I mean, this is one of those rules I had was like, Cadre, there's a difference between punishment and PT. If they're doing PT, you will do that PT with them. If they're punishment because they forgot something for the packing list or whatever, yes, you can have them do push-ups or flutter kicks or something like that. But you are not going to do PT and then stand over them while they're doing the exercise. You will do that exercise with them. And all the cadre bought off on it.
I was never the best in shape guy, but I took the same philosophy as Rolf. I infilled with them, and I didn't exfil till they exfilled. Of course, I got to eat and sleep and take breaks and all this and that. But if they were in the field, I was in the field. Same thing with my cadre, and we would rotate. So they could see that, that, and I didn't know it at the time, but a lot of students afterwards have come up that, look, we knew you guys generally cared for us. Even though it sucked the whole time, part of our motivation was the fact that these guys are, because believe it or not, there's cadre in the Q course that just hate students and crush them for no reason.
Yeah.
Or get rid of them for no reason. And I'm like, no, that's not my job. My job is to build the best student I can for the teams that are moving forward. And if the guy don't make for example, I had one student, he had some kind of, he wasn't a doctor, but he had some kind of doctor. He was a medical degree, just short of being a doctor or some bullshit. He spoke like 3 or 4 languages. One of them was Mandarin Chinese. He ran like a 6-minute mile, just what you want. But if you put him in a primary leader position, he fell apart. If he was a number 2 guy, he was fine. 2 or down. But when he was put in the primary leader position, he just melted. And they made him, I put him through SOPC 2 like 3 different times. And he failed SUT. And the cadre was like, the command was, we want this guy. His medical degree, his physical stamina, his language proficiency. I'm like, I got it. But I can't teach that part of it. That has to be with him already. Let's go back to the first officer in charge of SOPC. He actually wanted us to teach motivational classes. What was that stupid moose
Tony Robbins
carried? Tony
Yeah.
Robbins. Tony Robbins was some kind of motivational, whatever the fuck he is. And I'm like, sir, I can teach, I don't know. It's not my job to teach, I can't. So if that has to be in the individual has to have that within them. That's not something that we instill in them.
Yeah, got to know your limitations. Got to know what you can. And some people you're just not going to be able to do it. A guy I went through SUT with, he was not going to get it. He knew everything about the SUT manual and troop leading procedures and everything until we were in the field, and then he forgot all of it. And luckily, you guys said, checking the block for the Alpha team leader or the Bravo team leader or whatever it was. Well, when I went through SUT, Bravo team leader wasn't allowed to leave the ORP. So I sat with the gear while this guy killed the entire squad. So I ate a chili MRE and got to go, and they all got dropped. So that's how it worked for me as a Bravo team leader. So did I have the hardest SUT class ever? No, because I didn't go on the objective for my look. So experiences may vary, but that's all right. Whatever. I made up for it in the Charlie course.
I thought it was always funny. I was in the last easy class. Because, everybody always says, "Hey, I was in the last hard class." You're like, "No, I was in the last easy class."
I was, but the way I hear you guys describing it, I made, you're teaching kids how to go make their boots more comfortable and how to do land nav and all these other tips and tricks at McCall and all these other things. I guarantee you, I made selection as hard as possible on myself as I could have because there was no training program. There was no anything. I just had a 300 PT score. I knew nothing about land nav when I got there. I did not know there were events. I didn't know. Whatever I got was from 2 weeks in hell. And I was like, okay, I got to get ready for this. And I'm like, this isn't how things are. And I thought it was going to be totally, I made it as hard as possible on myself. But in my mind, that's what I was ready for. I really wish I really wish somebody would have told me what to do with my feet because I destroyed those things. I was in pain from the time we got done with the first running event in the sand until graduation. It was brutal on my feet. That was the only part I tell kids, I go, if you're gonna do nothing else, take care of your feet because I was in immense pain the entire time and I didn't need to be. So that's what I tell kids to take care of first. It's the most important part of your game.
Yeah, I had a packing list for them of things that they should go buy, and I put it to them like this. I'm like, "Hey, if you go buy everything on this list, it's roughly, let's say, 150 bucks. Let's say like better socks than what your issue, that kind of stuff, right? Boot improvement, whatever. So maybe let's say 200 bucks for round figure. I'm like, you go spend those 200 bucks. But let's say you have a 60% chance right now of how you are physically, capably, and mentally. You have a 60% chance of getting through selection. But if you spend 200 bucks and you can improve that to 80%, is that not money well spent? Like, be conscious of what you're putting in. You're investing in your future by getting better stuff than what you're issued to make the experience more survivable.
Yeah. Yep, the issue boots, that wasn't the way to go. I did it twice, but just didn't know any better. Just did it again. Made it. I can't even imagine. It just hurts. So anyway, I'm bitching. But yes, I was in the first easy class. I did not have selection was the top of the mountain for me, and then after that, things were hard, but not to me. I knew once I got selected that I was going to graduate, so it was all a different mindset for me. People are like, I need to get through selection so I can go to this. They told me exactly what I needed to know on the rest of the phases to pass, and I just did exactly what they told me to do. In selection, it's a fucking mystery. It was to me coming from Fort Sill, where there was just a rumor of a guy that had gone to selection from my unit, and then he just wasn't there anymore. And that's the tale everybody knew about selection. So, gentlemen, I'm gonna go eat some lunch. I figured out why I lost the plot today of listening to you guys is because I'm a private. Really, I am. I was spent my entire career as a private trying to get to be a senior NCO, and I just was always working towards it. And finally, when I got the rank, it was over. And so now I get to have my show and I get to talk to people that actually got to do the full thing. And I just love listening to the stories. I'm just always so honored that people want to come over and talk to me, private ward, that really never accomplished anything, but maybe I can in my second career as a Green Beret and help people tell their stories. So thank you very much for coming to talk to me. And that's why I lost that say, because I was like, this is so cool learning about the process and hearing all these stories and just getting to talk to you guys. And because I think being a Green Beret was cool, and I'm just honored that I got to wear the same beret as some of these other heroes that I got to serve with. So thank you guys for coming on.
In the beginning, I know, at least I know third group, the scuba team sergeants, they scooped up all the first x-rays because they were like, I'm a squad leader in the Ranger Battalion again. I got young, motivated studs that just want to kill. And, of course, they went through other branches, but initially, once people started to push back on the idea and started, you know what? I got a kid that's in great shape, fresh out of the course, that only knows what he's been taught, and I'm going to make him what I want on my team. And it usually was the scuba team sergeant that still had that mindset that, yes, I'm back to a squad leader in Ranger Battalion, and I'm just going to run a killing squad.
Hey, it's better. I think, what did somebody teaching somebody how to ride a bull. It's easier to teach a person to ride a bull that doesn't know anything than somebody that knows a little bit. And I've always thought about that. If you can't unlearn some of these bad habits once you get them and things like that, it's easier to teach somebody that doesn't know what the fuck they're doing. And that's with the X-ray program. But as you said, Rolf, they didn't know how to submit a leave form, but they knew how to do battle drill 1 alpha, or what did you say earlier, right?
Yeah, they could give them a mission statement. They can execute an ambush. And both me and
Execute an
Rolf are
ambush.
road bulls.
Gentlemen, how can everybody find you guys on the socials if they so choose? Nathan.
I just recently become fully retired. I was the mayor of my hometown up until the first of this year. And now I'm on Facebook. But other than that, I'm just in Estancia, New Mexico. I'll be here till I die. Literally my coffee table is a coffin, and I already got my gravesite bought in the hometown. So I'm in Estancia, New Mexico. I'm on Facebook.
That's
And
pretty
I'm
morbid.
political in this. The governor of New Mexico does not like me. I'll tell you that much.
I guess that's a story for another time. Rolf, you got a tactical company, right? I think you got real creative with the name Jensen Tactical.
Yeah, tough one to figure out. No, a couple years ago, it's kind of based on what I did in my last tour while I was in 10th Group, where I developed a detachment called the Winter Warfare Detachment. And this was to consolidate the knowledge and information for operation in extreme cold weather. So I spent a lot of time over in Sweden, went to Norway, figured out how they were operating because we had atrophied all those skills from when we, like 10th Group, used to just go to the woods and be in the snow and ski. Well, Team Sergeants and below didn't really know any of that stuff. And I was a dinosaur left over when the group sergeant major came to me and said, hey, after a discussion, like, hey, well, I'm going to put you in charge of getting the group back into cold weather. This is when we were getting out of Afghanistan, like starting to think about that in 2016. So 2017, I did establish the Winter Warfare Detachment, and that became like the tip of the spear for Arctic and extreme cold weather operations. And I basically modeled our TTPs and SOPs off of what the Swedish and Norwegians were doing. And I saw a bunch of their equipment and uniforms they were using. So I just basically modeled a lot of our stuff off of that. So after I got out, I initially started working for L3Harris, which was okay. It was still post-pandemic, so there weren't a lot of jobs out there. So I took one of one job offers and went and worked for L3Harris for a little while. But while I was there, I was contacted by a company called Taraka, which is a Swedish firm that makes these uniforms. And I became the U.S. rep for them. And that was basically just, like I said, a side hustle, not enough to like bring home the bacon, but something nice to have extra. But then I evolved that into making my own company. So about a year and a half ago, I started Jensen Tactical. Jensen Tactical LLC is mostly like a gear distributor. I'm the U.S. distributor for Taraka, but I also sell other products like MSR stoves and MSR gear, Thermarest, Cold Avengers, a company out of Missoula, Montana that makes a lot of cold weather accessories. So that stuff's all listed on the website, jensentactical.com. And also to help encourage it, which I never thought I would do this, but I created a YouTube channel for Jensen Tactical LLC where I've got some videos on there where I explain the stuff. And I was just over in Sweden this January. I was in Sweden last January because one of the last things I did before I got out was I submitted all the paperwork to have a Swedish sergeant major get assigned to 10th Group. So he was there for 2 years, being essentially like LNO and helping continue the progress of the cold weather training and all of its development. And then he went back. Well, we're still friends. I'm friends with his family and his wife and daughter and all that. And so I went back there and saw him, but also he gets me in. He's still running the cold weather training back there in Sweden. So I went back there to see him and then to visit the training. And so a bunch of those videos are posted on the that YouTube channel, also Instagram and Facebook. And then I just got back actually a couple days ago or a week ago from visiting the cold weather training in Montana that 10th Group's conducting because I still have those connections. So getting around to see the guys, that's what I enjoy about it because what I really felt, what I didn't like was the fact that once I was out, I was removed from that SF community. I was working at L3Harris. I was working with a bunch of retired Air Force guys. And I will tell you that Air Force guys are nowhere near Army guys, part one. They are definitely nowhere near SF or soft guys. And I just could not really handle being over there much more. So I just thought, well, I'm going to start developing things to make it so I can have this company. And so it's still in the startup phase, if you will. A lot of things are continuing to grow, but I've also partnered with Cold Avenger to help create some products. Yeah, so I've created a cold weather tactical trauma bag for guys to carry when they're in cold weather. And then I've been a huge part of creating a new cold weather uniform that units can buy that's very compliant, which means it's US made and US resource. So anyway, just trying to keep myself in the mix of being around special forces, 10th group. But this also gives me a chance, like I go up to Washington State, visit with the mountain locker and the guys in first group, have lots of contacts with them. Coincidentally, he was mountain locker, now he went to the B team because he's getting ready to retire. But the guy that's has been running their mountain locker was also a SOPC graduate. And then while I was over there visiting just like a month ago or 6 weeks ago, as I'm talking to him because he's at the B team, I just said, "Hey, young looking Sergeant Major." I was like, "Hey, Sergeant Major, did you by chance go through the SOPC program?" He's like, "Yeah, I sure did." He had gone through after I had left, like 2006. But yeah, and that's the thing that's funny about SOPC for just a second is that the guys who Nate and I put through back, the course 2002 up to 2005 timeframe, those guys are sergeants majors or have already retired. So it's kind of funny to think that our students are now at the highest level or retired already. And it's sort of hard to think about, like, because it doesn't seem like it's that long ago to me, but clearly it was quite a while ago. But yeah, so anyway, the point of the story is that, yes, I created Jensen Tactical based on cold weather knowledge and experience that I had for the last 3.5 years of training here in Colorado, going over to Norway and Sweden, spent a lot of time over there and replicating all of their cold weather tactics. And so now I offer those types of things through my website. So if anybody has any questions about the gear, procedures, operations, TTPs, SOPs, I'm here for you. Hit me up, Rolf at jensentactical.com or Jensen Tactical. You can find me there and hit me up on the registration page.
All right, gentlemen. I appreciate you guys coming on. You guys got anything for me?
If you're ever in the middle of New Mexico, I'm easy to find.
I think I'll probably get out to Rolf a little sooner than that, but New Mexico probably in October. So we'll circle up with that. Gentlemen, I appreciate you coming on. Bye, everybody.